passengers. On the 28th of June, the Health Committee held another meeting to examine the draft Health Inequality Strategy. The committee's scrutiny has led to a number of improvements to the draft strategy, and the final version is intended to come before the Assembly for consideration in September. The Health Committee has also launched an investigation into London's ambulance service and will be holding an open mic session at City Hall on the 17th of July for anyone with views on this topic. More details about this are available on our website at london.gov. Declarations of interest. Can I ask you please to note the recommendation set out in item 27? Thank you. In addition, do members have any other declarations to make which are relevant to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? Okay. Thank you very much. Minutes. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meetings held on the 4th and 7th of June 2018 to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. Now we have the principal business of today's meeting, which is our question and answer session on the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. We have before us Liz Peace, CBE, Chairman of the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation, and Michael Mulhern, Interim Chief Executive Officer of the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
There will be 3 lead-off questions, and Assembly members may ask supplementary questions after each of the lead-off questions has been answered. Before asking the lead-off question, the Assembly will receive a short opening statement from the Chairman and the Interim CEO of up to 5 minutes in total. Which of you is going to go first?
I will kick off, Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to meet you all. In fact, to some extent, my opening statement may answer the first of the questions that has been put before us, which is to talk about what we've actually been doing since last September when I appeared before you with Victoria Hills, the previous CEO. We've had a very busy period. We feel it's been very productive. We have produced now our delivery plan for unlocking the Old Oak North part of the site. If you remember, when I spoke to you before, I explained that we were looking at how we could divide the Old Oak Challenge, or the Old Oak and Park Royal Challenge, into a number of deliverable chunks so that we weren't actually trying to do everything at once and managing to do nothing. And we have focused on bringing forward what we call Old Oak North. And we now have a delivery plan for that, which was agreed by the board, by our board and by the GLA in September last year. The biggest thing that's happening to us at the moment is the whole process of bidding for money from the Housing Infrastructure Fund. This is something that's been set up and is administered by central government. We have put in a bid for 250 million to spend on, as the name implies, infrastructure that will help us to unlock that Old Oak North portion of the site. We have got through the first stage and we are now working very, very energetically to get through the outline business case stage, which is a process required by any dispensing of central government money, and I can talk a bit more about that if you want me to. And we see this as a crucial injection of resource to actually help us unlock in the order of 11 to 12,000 homes in this Old Oak North area. We've underpinned this with the sort of things we have to do, which is bringing forward a credible local plan. We have actually revised the original draft of the local plan quite substantially on the back of detailed planning work that was done for us by ACOM as part of the master planning. And this in itself has been a very productive exercise. This wasn't just a soft and fluffy, shall we put a tree here, shall we put a tree there. This was a detailed piece of master planning, actually looking at how we could deliver our local plan, and that has caused us to make some amendments which Mick will be happy to talk about. Detailed things like how you cope with different levels, how you manage the access into and out of the site, how you align the bridges, the underpasses, all the other various things we need. So a very complex piece of work. We've also been continuing to talk to HS2 and DFT about the station in the south of the site. Now that won't be our focus for delivery well, at least for the next till 2026, because the station won't be completed till then. We need to let HS2 sort of have free rein to get it built. But what you do need to do is make sure it is designed and its connectivity is designed in such a way that it fits in with our future plans. So we have been working very closely with HS2, and they've agreed a number of significant changes to the station in order to facilitate its future incorporation into what we're trying to do. And our planning committee has permitted 2,049 homes, 34% of those affordable, that's by unit, and we've actually got 1,412 starts on site. So there is actually some stuff happening there. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to strengthen the board with some additional members. My recruitment at the end of last year was specifically aimed at bringing in some people with commercial delivery experience, and that's what I've done. We are now in the process of doing a recruitment exercise because all the people who joined the board when we set the corporation up are now, they've done their 3 years. We actually extended them a little bit. They've done their period, so the mayor requires us to go out and re-recruit. So I'm currently recruiting 6 members, which will cover a wide range of expertise, community, local business, regeneration, all the sort of facets you would expect, in addition to the commercial expertise I've already got.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think Liz has covered that quite comprehensively.
Thank you very much. Well, the first question is in the name of Assembly Member Shah. As you say, you may have already answered it, but I'm sure he's got something to say.
Thank you very much for your introduction and kind of a brief summary of what you've done over the years since the last plenary. I'd like to focus more upon the local plan as well as the master plan aspect. So, but would you like to add a bit more as to how you have progressed the local plan itself?
Well, at this point, since I didn't allow Mick to get in the introductory statement, and since this is his background and has been very much his baby, I'm going to hand over to Mick, who'll talk to you about our local plan.
We are currently out for our final stage of public consultation on the local plan. It's an ambitious plan which we've been working on over the last 2 years. Liz has referred to the fact that we have brought in a consultant team, ACOM, who are supported by a range of consultants, to effectively interrogate the previous version of the local plan that we had, ensure that it was credible, able to deliver the policies in the London plan and the emerging, or the draft London plan and the emerging London environment strategy and the housing strategy that goes with that. And as a result of that work that ACOM have been advising us on, it's led to a series of changes to the proposition of what we want to deliver in Old Oak North. We felt the need as a result of that to go out to reconsult on the content of the local plan and what it was saying, informed by that master plan work, to ensure that local people and London as a whole have that opportunity to kind of review the work that we've done and give us their views back. So that consultation is live at the moment and will conclude on the 30th of July.
Can you tell us what changes actually have you made to the local plan in response to the consultations, which have been quite numerous, I'm happy to say, and also what has been the feedback from the local community groups?
Yeah. We had, so this is our third stage of local plan consultation. In our first stage, we had over 10,000 comments received, and we went through quite a long exercise of addressing a significant number of those comments. In the last consultation that we ran in September last year, that reduced down from 10,000 comments to about 2,500 comments. And since then, what we've been doing is focus on addressing those 2,500 comments. They've ranged across revisions to, as I've said, largely infrastructure requirements in Old Oak North, changes to our social infrastructure requirements, and by that I mean healthcare provision, nursery, education, community space provision. We've made a whole series of changes around how we deliver on some of the emerging mayoral policies from the London plan, like the changes around affordable housing provision, and in particular some of the key challenges we've had to address around the London environmental strategy, about how we effectively deliver on some of those targets around, say, zero carbon, air quality neutral, how we address requirements around greenfield runoff rates. So that's the work that ACOM have been helping us address, those quite technical issues that the challenges around the London plan, or the policy requirements around the London plan have helped us to do. In addition to that, we've also been progressing work with High Speed 2, as Liz has already referred to, about some of the changes that we seek around there, and our policies now include a number of those requirements in there. We've also been looking in more detail at Park Royal and the aspirations that we have to protect, to strengthen and intensify that area, and that's included various pieces of work on transport. How do we improve the transport capacity in that area? How do we identify a series of sites in that area to intensify so that we can ultimately support delivery of 10,000 new jobs in Park Royal? So there's been a myriad of different pieces of work that we've done to really focus on how do we bottom out and address the 2,500 comments that we received last September. And I think what we feel very confident now is that we have a very credible, very robust, very well-evidenced plan that we think goes a significant way to addressing those comments. And as I said, public consultation that's live at the moment may throw up other comments that we'll need to consider.
Last night I was at the local residents meeting which was organized, where there was some presentation on the update, etc. One thing I've picked up is that there's a lot of frustration within the local representatives about the delay in local plan, and particularly, therefore, the impact arising from that, which is local or master plan itself, which they want to monitor quite rightly. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what the expected time frame is to complete the London planning? I think there will be examination in public on that one, isn't it? And then the master plan. So what was the time frame for both, please?
So our timescale at the moment, as I said, is the public. So our board, we started consultation on the 14th of June, and that will run for 6 weeks. So that will conclude on the 30th of July. We will have to wait and see, and as part of that consultation, that master plan work is part of that consultation. So we've already, I think the session that you referred to last night was focused on social infrastructure and town centre uses. The week before that, we had run a session on Old Oak North and the content of the master plan. And that was another very well attended local event. What we do need to do now is to see what local people have to say about that, and Londoners in general. Our programme at the moment, subject to nothing difficult coming back from those consultations or valid responses being received, our programme at the moment is to bring a final version of our local plan back to our board on the 25th of September for approval to submit to the planning inspector. Once that's submitted, we have a programme ultimately that's dictated by PINs, but we're hoping to be at examination early in the new year.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Since we last met, the ONS has said 28% of London's construction workers are from the EU. In light of this, and given that the Deputy Mayor for Housing has said an additional 13,000 construction workers are needed in the capital, perhaps, Liz, as Chair, you could advise me, do you think there are going to be problems in getting your project built?
Well, I think anybody doing a substantial development in London is watching this issue extremely closely. The only thing we can do about it, I don't think we're powerful enough to influence government policy on Brexit and immigration. The only thing we can do about it is look at how we can address skills on the ground. And we've been doing a lot of work on that. We work closely with HS2. They, of course, have been looking at how they can build capacity and build capability through skills academies. Mm. We've been working with the local authorities, and I forget the name because I was getting bits of West London confused. Mick will help me. The academy that we're...
West London College. The
West London College to actually drive a skills programme. We're looking at a number of sort of interesting options for supplementing that within the local area to create better, to provide better skills training and opportunities.
A concern for you. Also in September you told us it would be a struggle to get the funding needed to make the regeneration a success. How do you think Brexit will impact upon the ability to secure the funding you need?
Well, I think in a way, I don't want to sound overconfident, but I think from a funding perspective, I feel a little more, I feel we have a better opportunity now than we had when I spoke to you last time. Okay. The Housing Infrastructure Fund, providing we can put together a convincing case, is going to be crucially important. And I would ask any of the Assembly members who can help us on that whenever you get an opportunity to bend anybody's ear on that, please do so. I don't think we're asking for a huge amount of money in terms of what we are going to be achieving. I mean, if you compare what we're doing and with the Olympic Park, you know, a mere 250 million, I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek, you know, will make a huge amount of difference in terms of helping us to unlock what we call the Western Wedge. It's actually a key part of Old Oak North. If we can get that going, and given the sort of timescales, and the economy will be in a different place in 3, 4, 5 years' time, I think that will show the market that Old Oak is really happening. It'll start to create a momentum. I think that will improve values, and I think the private sector as a whole will be a lot keener to come in and work with us on the rest of the site.
Relying on the government's funding for that.
The 250 million is quite crucial.
Yes,
I mean, we're putting a
crucial.
lot of effort into getting that.
Will a loss of access to the European Investment Bank and European investment funds impact potentially on the project? You're relying on government, but if that didn't come up, other projects in London have been funded.
We haven't specifically targeted the European Investment Bank. And I think, you know, my view and the view of our very commercially minded members on the board is that if we can just get this sort of, if you like, seed corn funding, there are plenty of opportunities within the private sector. I mean, there are an awful lot of people who do want to invest in London that, you know, are not at all put off by Brexit. We have some terrific development opportunities, and I think, you know, if we can kickstart this and show that we're really going to deliver an excellent place that is going to thrive, then I don't think we will. Well,
you're
too
relying on
optimistic to
money.
say we won't be short of funds. We will have to fight for them. We will have to put a good case.
But you are relying on funding from government that you hope will come in order to get that further investment in.
Initially.
Could I ask, do you see that there are any other escalating costs as a result of Brexit? Certainly I'm picking that up, talking to people around London.
I think probably the bigger impact for us, and whether it's directly due to Brexit or not, is when you're actually looking at an investment appraisal, or when we're looking at the funding for this over the next sort of 4 or 5 years. The key is what's going to happen to values. And there's a huge amount of debate, certainly around the property world, about where values, particularly in residential, are actually going to go. And actually, if you put 2, 3, 5 property experts in a room, none of them can agree anyway. I think that's, you know, our biggest challenge is if housing values, residential values in London go too far south too quickly. You know, rather than any other specific Brexit-related issues, other than the skills point you mentioned, which, you know, I've absolutely, you know, yeah, that is a serious concern. We're doing what we can within the framework of possibilities.
Okay, and then my final question to you is...
No, I'm afraid
4.4 I'm on?
my timekeeper, who is a different timekeeper from the usual one, clearly shows time up.
Okay.
I am sure that
you
they
very
will
much.
provide a written answer to your question. Assembly Member Cooper.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. My question is about the leadership, which I've asked about before. Does the OPDC have the right leadership in place to meet the challenges of the next 5 years?
I am confident that we do. I'm not quite sure which bit of the leadership you're referring to, so I'll divide that into
perhaps we
parts.
can start with asking about the new CEO and progress on that and a timeline for getting someone in post.
Okay. Victoria Hills left us in April. We put in place an interim arrangement and asked Mick Mulhern to step in as our interim CEO. I would have to say, sparing mixed blushes, that is working exceedingly well, and I don't believe we are suffering in any way whatsoever from having an interim appointment. We went out to the market to find a new CEO. We actually felt that because of all the doubt about the shape of the programme over the next 12 months in the light of whether or not we get the Housing Infrastructure Fund bid, that possibly we weren't in the best position to access potentials in the market. So with the Mayor and the Mayor's staff's agreement, we have actually decided to suspend the recruitment exercise, probably until around the end of the year, until the HIF situation becomes clearer. I'm entirely happy with doing that, because our interim arrangement is working so well. Mick has tremendous experience. He's been with this project since the start. He knows everything there is to know about it. and he has stepped up to the role of CEO and is leading the team extremely well, and I'm very, very happy with that. On the board side, as I said, we've supplemented our board with some commercial property expertise.
Yes, in a previous discussion we did ask about that, and that was one of the intentions that you said you wanted to do some strengthening on the commercial side, but you're obviously recruiting at the moment, and looking at the JD, it does seem to be very focused into that area. Are we definitely going to be able to retain people who have those strong community links? My colleague, Assemblymember Shah, was just asking about community involvement in the master planning and meetings that he's attended. I think it's really important the community can see that there are community reps on the board.
I absolutely agree with you, and I'm sorry if you got that impression from the job advert, because it wasn't meant to do that. You know, I have made it quite clear. We have one specific community representative on our board at the moment, although I should stress that Amanda Souter is there as a board member, not because she specifically represents a community
I'm not suggesting
group.
that she's there in a sort of representative capacity.
And I have discussed with Amanda and other people in community representative bodies that we are absolutely clear we want somebody, one body minimum, and I would be prepared to look at a second that was was there to represent the interests of the community in whatever way it can best be achieved. I absolutely agree with you that this is vital, and I've had the conversation with Amanda that, you know, perhaps being the only one on the board doing this is a little bit. She may feel a bit lonely. It might be better if there were two.
That's good to hear, because I think strengthening the board can't just be about the commercial. It has to be about that full span.
Totally agree.
Different
with you.
individuals, and I think you were also looking, hopefully, for somebody with a sort of social housing regeneration background. Have you managed to identify someone?
We are in full flow on our recruitment process at the moment. We are using an eminent search consultant who has good tentacles into many, many different markets, and that's certainly an area I'd be interested in. We also have a board member at the moment who's there representing local business, which I think is a small local business, which I think is really important when you look at the makeup of the commercial activities in Old Oak and Park Royal. And I'm quite clear that whether or not that individual reapplies, there needs to be somebody on the board representing local business interests as well.
I think that's really good to hear, that there'll be both resident and local business representation on the board.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Assemblymember Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning.
Morning.
Can I ask you, how do you intend to go about attracting the necessary finance that you need to realise your ambitions for the regeneration of Old Oak? And in particular, what concerns me is, how will you address any associated financial risks?
I'll kick off and then you can come in on the detail of this. I've mentioned that I see as part of our financial plan the 250 million from the Housing Infrastructure Fund is really important. But it's worth bearing in mind, we don't currently own any land in Old Oak. There are a lot of private landowners. If we can get them, one big one in particular, if we can pull them in the right way, we can use them, we can use their capital, we can use their equity. It doesn't always all have to be done by the public sector. So the important thing is to get the funds we need to do what we really need to do, which is primarily infrastructure, and then look at how we can leverage that with public sector support. I have a feeling somebody's going to ask us about what's the plan B if we don't get the 250 million. And we are, of course, thinking about that. There are a number of other public sector pots that we could try and access. There would then be private sector money. If we have to resort fully to private sector finance, then my concern would be we would lose some element of control in how we can make sure the scheme is exactly what we want it to be. I mean, yes, we will always have planning control, but it's even better if you've got a degree of financial control. And I'll shut up at that point and let Nick talk about risk and other aspects.
I mean, just to pick up on some of the financing points, clearly HIF is a big funding stream, but financing streams, we're in discussions with Homes England and with the GLA about various ways to finance some of the financial challenges we have and some of our cash flow problems over the longer term, how we manage that. In terms of how we manage risk, we have an audit and risk committee whereby we report our risks, our programme and our corporate risks, both at delivery and financial levels to the Audit and Risk Committee, and they interrogate that on a quarterly basis.
I think you think of establishing an investment committee as well?
Yes, yes.
Right, so when will this be set up?
Oh, it already exists.
That,
yes,
right.
yes. I mean, one of the purposes of the recruitment of a couple more commercial property people was to populate the investment committee, which I think when I joined the board had one member, which was Mr. Cowan, the leader of Hammersmith and Fulham, and even Mr. Cowan agreed that he probably needed a little bit more moral support on the investment committee. So we have now done that, and we appointed William Hill, who's an ex-Schroders investment banker, and a lady called Victoria Quinlan, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Lend-Lease. And we also use other expertise on the board to advise the committee. In that period when we only had Steve, we also relied heavily on Will McKee, who chairs our planning committee and has a considerable experience in regeneration, development and investment.
And finally, Chair, if HS2 does not go ahead, what are the implications?
Sorry,
If HS2 does not go ahead,
Oh, gosh.
what are the implications?
Well, Crossrail is going through the site, whatever happens. That is there. We have terrific infrastructure as well as HS2. There would be huge, this is a huge area of land with potential to deliver the sort of housing and jobs that London needs. So I would hope that we would still be able to attract investment to create a community in Old Oak. I'm talking about the Old Oak half. Park Royal is Park Royal, and I think that is also something that you would want to look at, improving, enhancing the job creation in there, enhancing the infrastructure. The project would lose some of its impetus, I have no doubt about that, if HS2 didn't happen. But I still think, looking at this area of London, it just has huge potential. I mean, do you agree, Nick? You've been with it longer than I have.
Absolutely. I mean, the majority of our work at the moment is focused on, as Liz has said, on Old Oak North, where we're confident we can get delivery of about 11,000 homes and 7,000 jobs over the next 15 years. High Speed 2 has a role to play in shaping the place and bringing people to the area, but ultimately there's a need for those homes anyway in London. They can come forward. They would have access to Willesden Junction Station, to North Acton Station and a Crossrail station at Old Oak. So I think that transport accessibility will be there. It is fair to say that possibly some of the impetus might change, but what I would say is High Speed 2 are on site at Old Oak. They're clearing away the land. They are gearing up and already doing delivery there. So,
just one other point to add. I always get into a lot of trouble for throwing this in, but I've got this sort of gleam in the eye that actually the HS2 station at the south of our site is going to be a tremendous transport hub. Eventually, if we could massively improve Willesden Junction, that could be an equally significant transport hub. I mean, the connectivity at Willesden Junction is tremendous. So, I'm very keen, and this is probably quite a long-term project, but I think there's a phenomenal opportunity to find a long-term investor and some patient capital to look at how you could create a real hub of commercial activity and an improved station at Willesden Junction. So if HS2 weren't to go ahead, then I think I would be quite keen on, turning my attentions to turning Willesden Junction into something fantastic.
Having lived there many years ago, I agree with your point about Willesden Junction, the need to improve it. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
Going back to the Housing Infrastructure Fund, if you do get the £250 million, I believe it has to be committed by March 2021. How quickly will you be able to move in order to commit that funding?
Well, you've put your finger on a very interesting point about the time commitment, and I have absolutely no doubt that that would cause us challenges. We would certainly be making the point to Homes England and MHCLG that if they could give us a bit longer. Oh, Mick tells me we can actually talk about the fact that they have intimated to us that we're going to be allowed until 2023 to spend it. I thought
Right.
that asked, and we want you to build 50% affordable housing. That's when they start to squeak, and probably with some justification. So if we can take out some of the infrastructure burden, then it becomes a lot more feasible to get to the 50%. But we are absolutely clear that the mayor's policy is a strategic target of 50%, and that's what that's what we should be looking for. We also think that if we can actually acquire some of the land ourselves, and there's also some local authority land in there, you know, we can take a slightly different approach to how some of that is developed out, again looking at the Mayor's strategic affordable housing target. But taking some of the infrastructure burden of potential developers, not going soft on them, I hasten to add, but taking some of it away is going to be key to that.
And sort of delving into that 50% affordable housing target, at the moment you're aiming for a blend, I think, of 30% London affordable rent and 70% intermediate, so shared ownership London living rent. But the OPDC Shema said it should be 85% London affordable rent within the OPDC area. Why is this, and do you think your target is challenging enough given what's been assessed in terms of the actual need?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask Mick to talk about the Shema, and then we'll come back to the broader principle.
So there's a couple of points just to answer in this. Is firstly, you're right, we've done our strategic housing market assessment. That does show a greater need, both for housing delivery as a capacity point and a greater need for social rent or London affordable rent housing. That is a universal fact across London. What we do then, once we have that data, is we assess, and we carried out a viability assessment of the potential to deliver that level of social rent or LAR within the scheme. And that assumes on various levels of sensitivity, with infrastructure, without infrastructure, and even in the most optimistic scenarios where we've tested sites without infrastructure provision, that evidence, which is out in the public domain and is on our website, demonstrates that actually you would not be able to secure any delivery of any homes with a meeting the Shema requirement for social rent and LAR. So that's a piece of work that we've consulted, we've gone through with the GLA, and what we've then done is tested a variety of different scenarios within, well, what level of affordable housing could we deliver within that, taking account of the London plan requirements, which is 30% LAR and 70% intermediate, and we've tested that, and that is the most appropriate way that we can secure, work towards that 50% strategic target. So it's a policy which has been interrogated financially and is one that fully aligns with the Mayor's draft London plan on housing.
And is that Teddy Blender without any public subsidy? So if the Mayor were to offer grant, for example, would that figure potentially go up?
I mean, to date what we've been doing is that's been tested without, that's been tested without affordable housing provision, subject to a credible scheme coming forward. We were in discussions with Homes for Londoners about what a programme of affordable housing grant might look like across Old Oak North.
Thank you.
And how that manifests itself. I mean, we're still looking at that.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you very much. Can I just, when you were last before us, we talked about the Memorandum of Understanding with the Department of Transport. Yes. Where have we got to? What progress have we made and how has it developed?
Right, the Memorandum of Understanding allowed us to acquire Network Rail and HS2 sites at broadly existing use value with some provision for profit share in the future. There are two key sites that we're interested in at the moment, and we're engaged in very constructive discussions with Network Rail. We are in the process of, I think we've got valuations for those sites, so now it's a good bit of horse trading. But Network Rail are happy to sell us those sites on broadly the terms in the MOU. There's always a lot of debate around valuation. Valuation is an art, not a science. So I hope we will reach fruition on that in the not too distant future. The DFT, who sort of obviously control the overall policy, have been helpful and supportive in allowing us to pursue this. So I'm very keen to get those sites secured, because I think that actually then shows that the MOU is actually working. And as I've always said, that was part of our dowry. That was what central government were giving us, and we need to, I can't remember the word I used, sort of cement that rather than it just being a vague agreement. So fingers crossed we're on track to do that.
So you think a deal will be done within months?
What do you think, Mick?
So we're currently, our intention is to have an agreement in place as part of our HIF submission, our HIF business case submission to central government, where
Which
we can
has to
be
be
clear
in September.
about. So that would be the intention is that that's an in-principle agreement. Would we have transacted on that? I think that transaction period may well take a little longer.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the other issue we talked about a year ago, was the help and support you're getting from this building, GLA Homes for Londoners, are they actually coming to play and giving you support in terms of those areas, and particularly in terms of housing provision?
We have an excellent working relationship with the Homes for Londoners team. We actually sit next to them now, so they've been moved into Union Street, so they fight over space in the coffee bar, and that's great because you can actually nobble people. I can even pin David Lumps down when I need to because I can see him in Union
As many
Street.
members around this table want to pin a little. We're very fortunate. We're very fortunate.
It's actually hugely helpful. My perception, and I leave a lot of this to the executive because this is their role, not principally mine, is that working relations have improved immensely with the Homes for Londoners team. They are supporting us in putting together our outline business case for the HIF bid. They, of course, are also administering funds from the GLA for land purchase, and we're talking to them about whether and how some of that could be used to support Old Oak. I mean, they're actually providing staff support to us. I'm very comfortable, and I think Nick is comfortable with the level of the working relationship there.
And in that, you gave us an excellent briefing note before you sit before us, and you've said in terms of addressing this committee about the issue about employment uses. What role does the LEAP play in discussions of supporting your work? Has the LEAP got an agenda in Old Oak?
Sorry, you'll have to forgive me on that acronym. What's the LEAP?
I think it's called, oh God, you've got me now. I call it the LEAP. It's the local economic, it's the London a local action group. It's the government thing that supports businesses.
The bit you're missing is action partnership.
Thank you, Chair, for rescuing me. Do you know what I mean? But by your answer, it seems that they're not active, or are they?
I haven't met them, but Nick might have done.
We have in the past presented the work that we're doing to the LEAP along with the Growth Board of the GLA. We do engage them, we do seek their views. At the moment, they haven't been, we haven't, there isn't a decision-making role for the LEAP in what we do, but we are engaging with them and taking them through what we do.
Oh, and in fact, I did go and brief them. I'd forgotten that was what they were called. Sorry, the initials. Yes, so I have actually been down in Victoria's time. She and I went down and
I think
attended
a
a meeting
key
and briefed them.
I mean, I think a key area that they are and will increasingly support us on, coming back to Caroline Pidgeon's point, is about skills and the agenda that they have around bolstering skills, and in particular for us the priority on that in the first instance is around construction skills, which is an issue, and we've been doing quite a bit on that, not least. One of the key successes I think we've had on skills is we've been supporting West London College, who will now open a construction skills college in Park Royal in September this year. That will offer 150 spaces for local people or Londoners in general to access construction skills. And that's been through joint conversations that we've had with the GLA skills team, the LEAP and West London College.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
But if I could just add, I mean, we tend to get sort of slightly mesmerised by the excitement of the potential development on the Old Oak part. We are very mindful of, well, both part of Old Oak and Park Royal, is a massive employment generator, a massive GVA generator for London and the UK. And we're very keen not to ignore that and to look at what we can, or make sure we devote some of our time to improving Park Royal, improving the transport, improving the environment, protecting the strategic industrial land, and looking at ways that we can wring some more use out of it through intensification, so that you could perhaps put residential around the edges, but only if you can replace any industrial space. And we're also very mindful of looking after the occupants, the small businesses on the core part of the Old Oak site that will be displaced by future development. We don't want to drive businesses away. We want to encourage them.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Shah.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask you, what is your engagement strategy for communities, both living within Old Oak area as well as on the edges or surrounding the designated area? both for existing as well as future communities?
I'll let Mick talk you through that, because we do a huge amount of community engagement, and indeed, were you to ask our community representative on the board, Amanda Suter, I think she would say that the quality of the engagement we do is exceedingly high, and we devote a considerable amount of resource to doing that, and our folk are out there talking to people an awful lot of the time. But I'll let Mick run through some of the different things we do.
Yeah, I think, just noting some of them down, I think Liz has already referred to the board makeup, which has a local resident and a local business on that. On planning, we've done, I would say, an exemplary level of engagement with local people. Our first consultation on the local plan had 25 local events across the areas. Second stage had a similar level, and yes, it's dropped down a little bit because the scale of concern at the moment is less. So huge amount of engagement on local planning. We have designated 2 neighbourhood areas and neighbourhood forums within the Old Oak area. Harlesden is the first, and we've been supporting them proactively in terms of putting together the Harlesden neighbourhood plan, which includes the areas around Willesden Junction. Our second area is Old Oak Lane and Victoria Road, which we've just designated the second. That's our second area, neighbourhood area, and we're helping them through the early stages of preparing their own neighbourhood plan for that key area of Old Oak. We have, alongside the planning bit, we have, I think, unique in setting up what we've called a community review group. We have a place or a design review group which is made up of built environment experts, chaired by Peter Bishop. And at the same time, we're now currently recruiting to a community review group, which will ultimately be a panel of 10 local residents and businesses, which get to review all of our policy and development proposals at the earliest possible stage, and they will ultimately get to shape that. Their views will then be represented and presented to the planning committee.
When will that review group be in actual place? When will the members be appointed?
So it's currently recruiting at the
running?
moment, and that recruitment is going to finish, I think it's on the 10th of July.
25th of July.
25th of July is written down there,
yeah,
So
yeah.
that will finish on the 25th. And that is, there are no other community review groups like that operating in London at the moment. So this is a first for London.
Yeah. I mean, I welcome that community review group, which is about empowering communities. Great. Yesterday, again, at the meeting, very clear kind of aspirations were there, and this is something I'd like to put to you for your action, and that is that local community is seeking active support, and that is not only funding for their activities, which are obviously ongoing forever. They want resources coupled with funding, which would include access to professional advisors and officers, because the whole project and the process is very complex. Support for elderly and disabled in community to enable them to engage actively, attend meetings, and participate properly. If you can take these away, and again, will this community review group be adequately funded? And do you have a funding strategy for genuine regular engagement with the community?
What I would say is, just a quick answer. I know you've asked us to take us away as an action, and we absolutely will give a written response on this. One thing we are doing at the moment is recruiting a support officer for both the Parkour Business Group and West London Business in our engagement with local businesses in the area to understand their issues and to help to grow the membership of the Parkour business. And in the same way, we're bringing on a dedicated support officer that will work with the residents associations and the community groups in Old Oak and Parkour, focus on residential issues, understanding exactly what it is that they want, and they'll be working to the chair. That person would ultimately be working to the chair of the Old Oak Neighbourhood Forum to do exactly what you've just said. So there are 2 new posts that we're bringing on to make sure that OPDC at a very ground level can understand the concerns and to support local people in engaging in the work that we're doing.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Curtin.
Morning.
Good
It
morning.
was very good to hear your answers about Brexit earlier, and the positivity that you have about your OPDC going forward, and as we approach Brexit Day, that people are still wanting to invest in London. But obviously you are concerned about skills, but Michael, you've sort of half answered my question talking about how you're going to be partnering up with West London College, and there'll be 150 spaces there. But I would be very interested to hear any more details you might have about the opportunities that you have to provide apprenticeships to British kids from London who could gain the skills that are needed that you need to continue construction and other things.
Just before Mick gets into the detail of that, just a sort of general comment. I mean, there are a lot of existing businesses on and around Park Royal and Old Oak, and a number of them already do very sort of active apprentice schemes, not particularly in the built environment area, but for example, Car Giant runs a very vigorous active training program to bring young kids in to learn the different levels of vehicle mechanics and fixing cars, which is a great skill to be able to take out. So we're keen to encourage business generally to support apprenticeships. When it actually comes to the sort of construction phases, we can do a certain amount. And when we actually get to letting contracts with people who want to develop on land that we hopefully by then will control, we will do all the usual things, as happened with the Olympics, of requiring use of local people, local apprenticeship schemes, all the things that you're already familiar with and that the Mayor expects to happen in London. So, I'm confident that will absolutely be at the at the heart of how we move forward the future development. So we build on what's already happening there. But do you want to add in?
So I'll just add a couple of key activities that we've been doing. So as I've already mentioned, West London College will open in September 18. Alongside the West London College, what we've been doing is working with the GLA, the new skills team at the GLA, to understand how we can fund dedicated resources to look more broadly outside just the Old Oakland Park Royal area. A second key thing that we've been doing with local job providers, the local authorities and businesses in the area, is exploring options around setting up a dedicated employment and hub skills centre within Park Royal that will do two things. It will largely, there's a pretty big IMBD in the surrounding area, and at the same time huge churn of staff within Park Royal. So a key task of the employment hub will be matching local people who are unemployed to the high churn rate of people in the Park Royal businesses. There's 46,000 people employed in businesses in Park Royal. That's the second key thing, and we're working with the GLA again about how that can be funded. A third element that we've done is in our local plan. We've set out quite challenging targets around apprenticeships that are baked into our Section 106 agreements. The focus of those is initially you source those apprenticeships and local labour from within the four boroughs of Ealing, Brent, Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea. And then if you can't meet those requirements, then you can look more broadly within London. And then only after that would we approve them bringing in apprenticeships from outside London. We are also working very closely with High Speed 2, and they've got a very ambitious programme about their subcontractors, Skanska and Costain, about the level of apprenticeships that they bring in. And one thing that we're doing for the businesses in the area is we're producing a supply chain directorate whereby all of the relevant businesses in Park Royal we have mapped, we understand what they do, and we will provide that to all of the developers and contractors that come forward in Old Oak, so that when they know that they need to, say for example, contract out a local cleaning service or a food production, etc., they know the local businesses are there, and we're encouraging those to go to those businesses first. So we're producing that at the moment.
Okay, thank you. But when we talk about apprenticeships, I mean, it's just one word that refers to a whole variety of levels, and there's a real need for the higher level apprenticeships, level 4, 5 and 6 apprenticeships. So when you mention apprenticeships, what sort of proportion of those are you thinking will be higher level rather than the sort of entry level apprenticeships? Or I don't know if you know that, but if you do,
I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but we can respond. But what I would say is within OPDC itself, we're trying to lead by example, and we've got 2 apprenticeships working within the corporation, and one of those one is an advanced and one is a higher apprenticeship. So I think we understand the need for variety within apprenticeships, and absolutely that will be in our policy. I just don't know the breakdown off the top of my head, but we can respond to you on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Assembly Member Gavron.
Good morning.
Good morning.
When we were discussing at the plenary last September, we were discussing safeguarding land for industry, for logistics, for services. I want to ask you now, how is your approach to safeguarding that land in Park Royal and Old Oak changed or developed?
Well, first of all, I should just say thank you very much at that last session, because you highlighted a legislative change that I think we hadn't even caught up with, which we have now taken action on in terms of looking at the Article 4 directions and where they needed to be put in place, and Mick can tell you exactly where we've got to on that. I'm not sure I would say that our approach has changed massively. I mean, the first point is we have to protect the strategic industrial land, and I'm absolutely clear, you know, that is an imperative, and there are different ways of actually doing that. What we have done is, and I always forget the technical term of this, what have we issued? It's not a the intensification. Site allocation strategy?
Yeah.
Yeah. We have looked at we have issued a site allocation strategy for Park Royal, which has actually highlighted the areas we think have potential for intensification. So that actually helps the owners of those sites, or people coming in to perhaps acquire those sites if they're up for sale, because it becomes a material consideration in any planning application that we would expect to see an intensification of use, so moving to 2- or 3-storey use of that site, which then sort of feeds back onto the price that might be paid for it, or the expectation. And we're working with a number, well, in fact, most of the owners of those sites, we've met them to talk through how that could be implemented.
I understand. Could I just come in? I understand you're putting in place a pilot. I don't have that much time. Just like to get through some questions. But I understand you're putting in place a pilot on intensification. And you've also brought out a really interesting document a year ago about intensification. With some great case studies. Is that pilot in place? And if not, when will it be? Just quick answers. And where will the location be?
So we won an award for that the other night, actually, for that piece of research. Just to say that, you know, it's a really interesting piece of work. The pilot at the moment the challenge for us at the moment is finding the sites in Park Royal, which is an incredibly low vacancy rate. Sites don't come to the market that often. We are currently actively looking at some of those sites at the moment with the GLA and some of the land fund opportunities that are there. So if we can secure a site, which we are actively looking to do at the moment, then our intention will be to do a demonstrator project as part of that pilot.
Will you write to us when you have the site?
Yes.
Because hopefully it'll be before the next plenary.
Yes.
I would love that.
Can I just go on with questions? Safeguarding land. You are relocating from Old Oak. You've already relocating industries from Old Oak into Park Royal. You're intensifying Park Royal. There is a huge waiting list now for strategic employment, strategic industrial locations because of permitted development rights in other parts of London. You have a very low vacancy rate. Are you safeguarding the whole footprint of Park Royal? It's a crucial question. Are you safeguarding the land, or are you intensifying and releasing land?
So we are, just to take a slight step back for a moment, we need to, by releasing Old Oak for comprehensive mixed-use redevelopment, we need to, in line with mayoral policy, we need to re-provide 235,000 square metres of industrial floor space. How we will do that is by protecting Park Royal as strategic industrial land, not mixed-use sites. We've demonstrated
the footprint of Park Royal.
The footprint of Park Royal. I mean, there is a plan in our local plan which clearly defines the strategic industrial land within there.
So you're safeguarding all the land?
There is all of the land is a broad term. There's a very clear diagram in our local plan which shows the area in Park Royal which is safeguarded, with a series of intensified sites in there which ultimately meet the requirements to re-provide.
I would like you to write to me, because you've said broad terms, which sounds like a weasel.
No, we are absolutely 100% safeguarding Park Royal for strategic industrial land. What I'm saying is I'm not clear when you say all. I'm saying there'll be bits around the edges, etc., which have never been strategic industrial land.
No, I'm only talking about what is already designated strategic industrial land.
So that's been retained. Old Oak is being released from strategic industrial land, and what we need to do is to re-provide that floor space on a variety of different sites.
And a last thing on Article 4. Last time you've just taken out in September an Article 4 direction on offices to residential, and I flagged up that there was a new threat now, which is permitted development rights, which came in at the end of September.
That's right.
Saying light industry could go to residential. Have you taken out a further Article 4 direction?
No, and the reason why we haven't is a key test for that is evidence that that the use is changing, so that people are actually applying and then going ahead and moving B1C to residential. there is no evidence that that's actually taking place in Parkour. So one of the key tests that we would have to overcome, and why we were successful in the original B1A, was because there was actually people doing that in the area.
Right. What about Old Oak, though? Because it could be a complete constraint on some of your plans if these were changed to housing, not quite what you want.
Yeah. So as I said, a key test for us to implement an Article 4 direction would be evidence that it's actually happening. And there is no evidence. So if we ran this now, it would struggle to get through because there is no evidence that this is actually taking place.
Okay. I understood you were doing a survey, actually.
Yeah, that's exactly what we did. We did that survey. We monitored the case, and there, nobody's applying for these permissions.
All right. I really worry a little bit about Old Oak, not Park Royal.
Okay.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Dismore.
The Mayor's vision for Old Oak includes a thriving new high street, quotes, given the pressure on retail and casual dining industries, especially because of rising rent and rates. What's your plan for creating a sustainable high street with the right mix of shops, businesses and leisure?
Well, I think you've put your finger on it by saying the right mix of businesses, leisure and others. If you read a lot of the literature on how to save our high streets, it's all about actually changing them from a focus on the wrong sort of retail, which can no longer survive, and actually looking at the different sort of uses that a community actually wants in a high street. So we would expect, and certainly our local plan has designated the areas for what we would term sort of high streets, mixes of commercial. we would expect a developer who's coming along to bring that forward to not only have read our local plan, but to be absolutely up to speed with what is happening in the marketplace. So there's no point them coming in with propositions for the sort of retail units that they're never going to be able to let. And if we thought they were doing it wrong, we would influence that through the planning process. So there's a lot of theory about how to make town centres stroke high streets more usable. They might look in the future rather different to what they've looked in the past. Nick, do you want to add something
What
to
I'd
that?
add quickly is, for us, the first phase of Old Oak North, which is 11 to 12,000 homes, that for us is what we're not trying to do is just build a residential suburb. We're trying to build an absolutely mixed-use place, which will include town centre uses, commercial space, B1C, B1A uses. So there's a spectrum of different types of flexible spaces in there that will be able to respond to economic changes over many, many decades. What we don't want to have is a shop that's built purely and can only ever be occupied as a shop. We need spaces that can be divvied up and changed over time. So, and in doing that, you need to think about the design of the unit. How is it serviced? How is it designed? And what the built footprint of that looks like. So we need flexible spaces here that can change.
Yeah, well, one of the key issues that's been thrown up over the future of high streets is the fragmentation of ownership of freeholds, which are often anonymously held offshore, which makes it very difficult to get a coherent plan together to sustain any given high street. So what's your intentions about the freehold ownership of the high street stroke town centre?
Well, the land that it depends whereabouts we are in Park Royal, in Old Oak, who will actually have the ownership of the land. But if, for instance, you were looking at the core of the Car Giant development, they actually own it. They can plan it as a single landowner and plan it in a way that would meet the requirements of the planning authority. The Western Wedge, which is actually the northern wedge, the northern arc of development that we're driving forward, we may end up actually being the landowner for a substantial part of that, because some of it is network rail land, which we hope to acquire under the MOU. So we will also be able to influence how that is actually developed. I mean, I totally agree with you. Part of the problem with existing high streets is this fragmented ownership, and it is I've done a lot of work with local authorities to try and get to the bottom of this and look at how you can remedy it. It's very difficult. We are quite fortunate in that we are creating new space. So actually we can specify, we can plan better for this than existing high streets can. The other area where this is relevant, we are trying to create a village centre, town centre, within Park Royal. And there is potential there for doing that with existing landowners. Fortunately, there are 2 or 3 quite big ones, like Asda, for example. And we are talking to them. We have some experts some architects in looking at a master plan for this new village centre, stroke high street, stroke town centre, whatever you want to call it, within Park Royal. So we're actually going to be creating something that I think will be a lot better than what's there
Okay. And obviously business rates aren't in your control, which is one of the main complaints. But you could have the opportunity to ensure that rents are set at reasonable levels for shops, restaurants, businesses that are dependent on footfall. Will you be putting in place arrangements to make sure that rents aren't exorbitant and thus threatening the whole project?
Well, I'll ask Mick to come in there. I mean, you have to be a little bit careful about how you control rents in, you can't control rents in, with the private sector. And I think rents as set by the property industry have been part of the problem with a number of high streets. Obviously, where
if you're the freeholder of a
if you're the freeholder, oh, that's different. Yeah, that's yes. Of course, of course, you can control it. Well, we would be looking at that as part of our overall development. I personally have always been a believer in affordable business rent as much as affordable housing. So I would certainly personally, and I haven't discussed it with the team, like to see how we would promote that.
So, and you know, to echo the point, if you control the land, you ultimately control what you do on that land and what rental levels you set. If you don't control the land, ultimately our role falls back to our role as a local planning authority. We have policies in our local plan which require a certain proportion of all commercial space and retail space, workspace to be provided as affordable workspace. So that would require certain elements of high street space to be given over at an affordable level.
Okay, and last point. London Living Wage, will you do what you can to make sure that employees are paid properly?
Sorry, I don't think I quite understood the question.
Right. Will you require high street businesses to make sure that the London Living Wage is paid to their employees?
So what,
can we do that? I mean, I agree with the principle, but
you know, we have, again, as a planning authority, ultimately, again, as a freeholder, and who you bring in to occupy your units, you can control over the type of business that you want in and ultimately the type of rents that they pay their staff. It's a similar situation. If we don't control the land, our role falls back to a local planning authority. Planning doesn't, and it can't restrict you to set future occupiers to a certain wage level, but what we absolutely do is we have policies and informatives with any planning application that we grant that strongly encourage occupiers to pay London Living Wage levels, and you know those doing construction works to pay London Living Wage levels.
Okay.
Assembly Member Whittle.
Good morning. Actually, like my colleague David, I really would like to commend you for, first of all, the straightforwardness of your answers and the sense of possibility amongst them and the enthusiasm, which I think is infectious. You're not being waylaid by issues such as Brexit, or indeed HS2 for that matter. That was another one. I'm very glad to hear it that wouldn't be fatal.
I'd have to say I would be mortified if HS2 were abandoned. I am a Brummie, and I think actually,
right.
you know,
well, we differ on
London
that. But anyway, it looks like you'd get round it somehow, which is good. What I really want to ask is going back to something that was said earlier by Assembly Member Copley in his question about affordable housing. It seems like a very basic point, but what do you, Liz, actually define as being affordable housing? And please, I don't require a short answer like the members opposite. You can take your time. So,
you've got time, right. Well, and I'll give you very, very strongly my personal view. I think affordable housing, there are a whole range of different definitions of different categories of affordable housing. And I actually believe getting a good mix of those different sorts of affordable housing is important. So whilst you have to, I think society has to provide a certain amount at social rent levels. So we're talking about the sort of 40% of market rent, you know, what I call social
market rent. Right.
Sorry, which is around 40%. This is what the RSLs, the housing associations, would have traditionally provided. It's the sort of equivalent of council housing. So whilst I think that's really important, I don't think you want to create a place where there's 100% of that. I think actually you need to get a mix. So you want to move up the scale to the, again, what used to be defined as towards the affordable rent, which can go up as far as 80% by the government definition, and I accept that 80% of market rent in some places is pretty unaffordable, but there's a whole range between 40 and 80, and then you've got the mix of the possibilities of shared ownership, which allows people to get on the housing ladder, and you may and you will on that site also then have your market housing. Now, I think that mix is the right way to go to actually make a mixed and balanced community.
Yes, no, I'm in terms of what you're wanting to achieve, you know, I'm totally with you. But I suppose what it is that people hear this thing all the time, you know, affordable housing, I hear it all the time. If you take, I live in Woolwich, for example. Now, a one-bedroom flat there now in the Royal Arsenal, which is a newish development, is around, a one-bedroom flat is around £375,000, £350,000. So are you saying that affordable, therefore, would be 80% of that?
Sorry, Mick wants to come in there, because I've got a point to answer that. But
would it be all right if I answer that question?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I think just to come back to Liz's point, I mean, we're very clear on what we mean by affordable housing. Right. So London affordable rent, the new social rent, a one bed in our area a week is £150, a two bed is £158 a week, a three bed is £167, and a four bed is £176 a week. Right. That's the rental level that you get charged for London affordable rent. The next level up, London living rent, what we say is that's maximum income of 60k a year, you can apply for that. That manifests itself, and this is very much in line with the Mayor's policies. A one bed is £928 a month. A two bed is £1,031 a month. This is up to, not that, you know, that's the ceiling. A three bed is £1,134 and a four bed is £1,237. The next level is London shared ownership, which can either be discounted market rent or it can be you take an equity of the mortgage. That's for people on income levels of up to 90k, and you spend no more than 40%. You can spend no more than 40% of your net income on your equity share of that property. So that's quite clearly our definitions. What we say then is we have a strategic target of 50%. The London affordable rental level of that should be 30%, and the London living rent and the London shared ownership will make up a combined 70%.
Oh, thanks for your clarity. Yeah, great, thank you.
Okay. And the next member is Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come on to transport, and in line with my colleague, Assembly Member Dismal, talking about some of the high street stores. It would be really great once everything's developed to make sure people are walking and cycling there.
Definitely.
So the OPDC Public Realm Walking and Cycling Strategy, published last April, talked about a vision to provide accessible urban environment for the old Parkour with high quality public realm. In terms of that strategy, there are a number of recommendations on there. How do you feel that the recommendations, and what progress are you making on them?
Well, I think first of all, let me say in principle, that is absolutely what we are going to try and do. Just to make the point that as we start development around some of the sort of edges and some of the earlier places, we can't get to that straight away, because until you've actually got control of a larger space, you can't put in the cycleways. So initially, at least, we won't be able to do that in the first few years. But what we have said, that absolutely remains our aspiration, and we're committed to making this a totally different area, a different suburb of London, with a transport policy or a transport arrangements that look really different. But I'll let Mick talk about the details of the plan.
We are 100% committed to delivering a network of healthy streets across Old Oak, and improving the street network within Parkour where funding is available to do so. We've agreed a network of streets with TfL, and we've applied the 10 indicators of healthy streets to that, and we're all completely satisfied that based on the level of design work that we've done to date, what we're bringing forward absolutely accords with those principles. So we're fully committed to that. We place walking and pedestrian movement and cycle movement at the top of our movement hierarchy. So we prioritise pedestrian and cycle movement within that street network, and then we access to public transport, be that High Speed 2, Wilson Junction Station, North Acton Station. A high quality bus network is absolutely paramount, embedded within that street network. So you've got those healthy streets that ultimately connect into those stations. Specifically, your question about how we've performed again, how are we delivering on the 10 recommendations from the public realm strategy? They are still fundamental to what we're trying to deliver, and we work through the detail. As you get into the detail and more detail about, well, actually, can we build a road that sails over part of the Crossrail depot? As you get through that level of detail with Crossrail and with High Speed 2, you realise actually we've got to move things slightly 50 metres that way because actually there's an electrical substation there that we can't now realise that we can't move. And as you continually get into that level of details, things shift around, but we are driven by the principle, that healthy street principle.
So on the Crossrail and HS2 station, because recommendation 1 is about investing in Old Oak High Street, and my understanding is that the review is looking at 4 proposed links to the HS2 station. Is there any update on that?
So that is clearly set out in our local plan, in this version of our local plan. So what I've said is, as we've moved into the next stage of detail, the street network has had to shift around to take account of a better technical understanding of the site, which is what ACOM have allowed us to be able to do. So subsequently, some of those streets have had to move around a bit, and I'm more than happy. I mean, there's a lot of detail in there. I'm more than happy to take you through that. It's very clearly set out in the evidence that supports the next version, the current version of the local plan that we're consulting on. So that detail is in the public domain about what's changed and why, but very happy to kind of talk you through that in a much more detailed level.
Something that often divides opinion is around segregated cycle lanes. So in the plan, you mentioned that you want to enhance existing cycle paths. So does that enhancement mean segregation or not?
I think you're right. Segregated cycle lanes do divide opinion. We, in terms of how we plan our cycle network across Old Oak, we are very much led by the experts at TfL and the new Deputy Mayor for Transport about the aspirations for how we deliver a quality cycle network in that area, and that's a level of detail that we're looking at the moment.
And then you cited the bus network as well. So there are a really ambitious new bus network proposed. So TfL's plans for the bus network in 2026 and beyond, looking at that, do you think that they are realistic?
So the bus network that is part of the local plan that's set out in the public domain and is on our website and that we're consulting on at the moment is a bus strategy which TfL have helped us develop and are fully committed. That's the bus network that they want to deliver in the area, and that's the one that they're happy to go out to the public and consult on.
Okay, so we're saying that essentially the key chunk of that bus network plan is around the new bus station that will be opened for 2026. So again, do you think that's still going to plan, or has there been any additional work?
So I think bus station may not quite be the right word. It's a network of bus stops across the area.
There was one that's going to be proposed as part of the HS2, so there'll be a new
so
bus
it's a bus
station.
So there's an interchange as part of the High Speed 2 station, which is a multimodal interchange, including cycle, taxi, bus, and High Speed 2 have now just appointed their detailed design team, Wilkinson Air with WSP, to plan that public interchange space around the station. So there's a whole series of requirements. We need this many buses. What WSP and Wilkinson Air now will do will figure out the best way to deliver and locate all those different stations in the area. So yes, that will need to open at the same time as the High Speed 2 station.
Right, no, thank you.
Thank you very much. We're now going to the second table question, which is from Assembly Member Berry, who says that notwithstanding what you have already said, she would like a full answer to her question.
Remind myself which that was.
10-year split and affordable homes.
Right. I thought we'd actually just done that, but do you want to go through the... Do you want to go through that again?
I can do that again.
I'd like you to answer the question I've tabled.
That's no problem at all. So the London Plan identifies that the Old Oak Park Royal area has a capacity to deliver 25,500 homes. Our local plan period, we believe, over the next 20 years, we can deliver 20,000 homes, just over 20,000 homes over that 20-year period, which is about 1,000 homes, just over 1,000 homes a year. As we've said already, that is dependent on public sector investment to bring forward some of those quite challenging and complex sites. We have an overarching strategic target of 50% affordable housing. We apply the London Plan's we apply the draft London Plan affordable housing policy, which is London affordable rent, London living rent, and London shared ownership. And the work that we're doing at the moment is largely around how do we realise that ambition on a mixture of public and privately owned land.
The question's about the tenure split within those affordable homes. What are the proportions of each?
What we have at the moment is... I was looking at the wrong table. So the tenure split. So what we have is If in the plan period up until 2038 we can deliver 20,100 homes, the number of affordable, this is if we secure the 50% target, the number of affordable homes will be 10,050. The London affordable rental homes will be 3,015, and the level of intermediate housing will be 7,035. That's if we get to that target of 50%, and as we've already alluded to, that might be a challenge on some sites. What we've also got is on the 35%, if we've got 35% affordable housing, what we would secure is 7,035 affordable units, 2,111 London affordable units, and 4,925 intermediate units.
So in each case there, the tenure split between affordable up to the government definition of 80% and proper social London affordable rent is 30%
LAR.
Properly affordable, and the rest are,
will be 70% will be the intermediate.
So I've been looking at the most recent supply of data from the London Development Database on the approved planning applications so far.
Yeah.
And within that, only 8% of permissions granted so far are for social rented homes. And as a proportion of the affordable homes, that's 22%, so that's not 30% yet. Obviously, we have the Strategic Housing Market Assessment for London, which says that 70% of the affordable homes, according to the need around London, should be at social rented levels. So what can you do to, in practical terms, to improve the proportion of social rented homes to get closer to your target and to get anywhere near what the Shema says?
I have different data. So I think there's a miscalculation somewhere here. So what I have is approved across the piece by OPDC is 23% London affordable rent and 9% social rent, bringing it to a total of 31%, which would be the equivalent of LAR.
I've got 129 homes in total. Is that the same number that you've got?
No, so I've got 223 affordable, the equivalent of LAR. One of the schemes was previously determined.
So that's an additional scheme that's not currently in the London Development Database that you've added on there, I guess.
I'm not sure. So we only report to the London Development Database yearly. The most up-to-date data that we have in front of me, which we pulled off our system, is 223 LAR social rent units, which equates to 31% of the overall proportion of affordable provided, and 69% of the homes that we've permitted are intermediate, which is 485 units.
Okay, that's closer to your 30% target.
It's just
at
over
least.
our 30%, yeah. That's
useful to know. What the Mayor's London plan draft says now is he would like a minimum of 30% social rent. He wants 30% at intermediate rents, and then leaves the other 40% of affordable homes to be determined by the relevant local authority based on identified need. Now, I think you said earlier, and it says in your draft plan, that your need assessment says that 86% of the affordable homes ought to be social rent. So that's nowhere near your identified need. So has the Mayor had any comment to make on your tenure split to improve this?
So we have gone through our consultation on our local plan, and the Mayor has responded to say that he's comfortable with our tenure split, which is 30% LAR and 70% intermediate, and that was on the previous version of our local plan. How our policy is written is you require 30% London living rent, and then exactly as you said, it's 40% could be determined, and our policy is flexible in terms of where that 40% is allocated, be that LLR or shared ownership. To come back to the point that I made to Tom Copley earlier on, is largely one of we tested our strategic housing market need.
So if I can address that point that you made, you've got a section in your planning policies, section 8.19 is one of the commentary, and I mean it's quite good. It says the presence of abnormal site constraints should impact on land values. However, the cost should not necessarily be borne through a reduction in planning obligations. Now that seems to me like quite a good argument for you doing better, particularly if you're thinking you might acquire some of the land and be the landowner who could accept a lower price. I'm just confused. Does the Mayor accept your argument that essentially mix and balance and land value and profit should trump the need that's been identified?
So I think where we're at the moment, there's a couple of points in there. So what we're doing is firstly applying mayoral policy, so we're fully in accordance with mayoral policy.
The policy says according to the identified need.
And what we then do is you test, can you viably deliver an increase beyond the mayoral policy, and that's tested, that's in the public domain. It demonstrates that there is no viability to be able to do more than that without some significant public sector investment to do that. So we're in.
Well, that was my question. What can you do? So more public investment.
Yeah,
will the housing infrastructure fund make a difference?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
what
Can you get more social housing?
We are fully engaging with the GLA, our Homes for Londoners teams, about the role for increased public sector investment into the area. We're fully engaged with MHCLG and Homes England about how the housing infrastructure funding and an associated financing package can be put into the area. What we want to do, and what we're very clear on, is that if public land is brought forward, so if we, OPDC or the GLA family, own public land in the area, there is a full expectation that that land delivers 50% affordable housing on that land. And that's what we've been testing.
And you'll increase the 10-year split requirements as well there, will you?
Go up in proportion.
Well, what we would do
No,
is...
I'm saying, will you increase the proportion?
Well, what we would do is apply our policy, which allows us flexibility on a scheme-by-scheme basis. It's minimum 30% LIR, and then you can apply the viability of that. But the base case is, as I said, 30% LIR, 70% intermediate, and that's what's out for consultation at the moment. So
okay, yeah, well, thank you. I'll leave it at that, but I will be responding to the consultation with some more comments on this.
Just to make a
Sorry,
point,
my time is...
I'll just quickly say, having sat through a number of our planning committee discussions, the local authority representatives who sit on our planning committee do make the point that they want to maximise the amount of social housing. We will do that where we can.
The Assembly member's time is rationed, and she thinks that you're using it up too rapidly.
Therefore so is mine. Right.
Assembly member Sahota.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to touch on how will you ensure there's enough social infrastructure to support the regeneration plans you have? How will you make sure that that is all in place?
You want to speak?
Well, we have a plan for social infrastructure. We are not going to be building homes, without the adequate supply of schools, doctors' surgeries, community facilities, the high street that you need to actually support that. Part of the infrastructure plan, is the infrastructure that will be funded through the Housing Infrastructure Fund. Some of it is provided through other means, the health authorities, NHS. It's not all stuff that we have to do ourselves. So the important point there is to make sure we're talking to people about who's paying for what's going in where. But part of our overall plan, and indeed the local plan, is absolutely clear about the social infrastructure that is needed to support those number of homes.
Okay. Your 2016 plan identifies Central Middlesex and Hammersmith hospitals within the areas stated. The scale of development planned in the OPDC provides opportunity for these facilities and others across London to expand to further medical science and help strengthen London's position as one of the world's leading centres of medical excellence. How will this disappear in your 2017 draft and in the 2018 iteration of that? So what's changed in your thinking between 2016 and 17 about the opportunities that this area gives for these two big excellent hospitals?
So I think the first thing I'd say is that was a consultation exercise. Through that consultation exercise, and since then we've been engaging extensively with the NHS, the Trust, our local health providers, the CCGs, etc., and the North West London STP. Off the back of that, we have, with the CCGs, the STP, the King's Fund, the GLA, have done a much more comprehensive piece of analysis about what is expected in the area, which also takes account of changes to some of our phasing and what we think will be delivered by certain dates. Where we get to is, in the current version of the local plan, which is there for consultation, is upgrades to 4 existing primary care centres in the surrounding area by 2023, which includes Central Middlesex Hospital. And in the later phases, there's a need to deliver on Hammersmith Hospital. This is for primary care, and in the later phases, there is a need for a dedicated facility within Old Oak North, which would accommodate the needs of 23,000 residents. And what we've been doing with the CCGs, etc., is planning for how and when that primary care centre will be built, funded, operated. Where we're at the moment is we're very clear on the requirement, and the next bit is how do we do this in a financially sustainable way. What we're looking at now as part of this exercise is how is acute care managed, and what is the relationship with the wider, say, Charing Cross Hospital or
I think the plans you have for primary care are are encouraging, and I've had a discussion with you. But what I'm concerned about, okay, is that the estimation for beds in London is already underestimated. There's a report from King's Fund saying we need more hospital beds rather than reduction. And this is an opportunity for us to have expansion of hospital beds in the acute sector, if need be. And I wonder how those discussions are going on with the NHS.
Yes, they are. It was a point that was discussed in detail at our board meeting in June when we brought the local plan and this information and to them, and what we've undertaken to do with the local CCGs and the health officers from the 3 local authorities is to very much interrogate how acute care provision for the residents of Old Oak can be met. And to be clear, it's a responsibility that goes beyond what we can do, but actually what we're here to do is to make sure that the NHS accurately take account of the population figures that we project for the area.
Great. Thank you, Michael.
Assembly Member Gavron.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask something that was prompted by a meeting of the Regeneration Committee yesterday, where we looked at the Royal Albert Docks, and we were told that infrastructure there is going to be funded from an uplift in the business rates, and that's quite a considerable amount when it's projected forward. And of course there's a lot of new development coming, and it made me wonder, is this available to you, this mechanism?
Uplift in business rates is a possible funding stream that we are looking at, we're calculating, we're taking into account. Whether and how we can access it is a matter to be discussed with the local authorities concerned and the GLA. We have a steering group in its very early stages, working group in its very early stages, looking at the possibilities. I am very conscious that local authorities are all strapped for cash, and they're all looking at enhanced business rates as being a possible source of funding things that they want to do. So this is going to need to be talked through, worked out, and some sort of agreement with the 3 authority areas that we cover. But yes, it is something that we see as a future potential funding stream.
At the moment, it's an option.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work to do with London councils included. We're not saying at the moment that it's necessary. I think we just need to understand if it is actually needed in the first instance. So there's a body of work which we're doing with the local authorities on that.
It did seem to be applicable because there, the Royal Docks, you've got the mayor owning a lot of the land and having a big interest, and you've also got Newham, a council, and together that partnership. And here you've got a mayoral development corporation.
Yeah.
So it seems to me, and 3 willing councils seems to me something that could be pulled off. My second and final question is, when I was asking about the safeguarding, I would like to have asked this question, which is, with the influx of people and jobs into the area, there will be a need for extra safeguarding for utilities. And let me just give you one example. Have you safeguarded land for sewage and water treatment?
Within Old Oak?
Within Old Oak and Park Royal?
Yes.
You have?
So within Old Oak, we are very, very clear on the level of utilities that we need to secure the comprehensive redevelopment of Old Oak, and that's across energy, gas, water, electric, etc. And those have been put in as requirements within the local plan.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Shah.
Thank you, Chair. Again, going back to meeting at Old Oak Common last night, tall buildings and densities featured very, very strongly. Starting point, do you have a definition of what constitutes tall buildings?
Yes, we do.
What height?
It's 15 stories or 48 metres above AOD.
Okay. Is this for both residential and commercial?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Also, what the concern was that about densities, what was described in Grand Union Alliance's report as planned hyperdensities. Yeah. The concern being, and this was very clearly expressed yesterday, that not only you're talking about very tall buildings, but at the same time, initially the strategy was to sort of locate those tall buildings within the sort of central hubs where you got, shopping, high streets, station and so on. But now it seems that you're even talking about tall buildings, potential tall buildings developed on the borders of the area. Is that true? Can you just tell us a bit more about what your overall plan is for tall buildings? How are you going to manage them?
Right, well, first of all, we do need to build relatively densely in order to get the numbers of units onto the site and in order to make the site viable. But we are very, very conscious that there have been high density developments which are frankly not very good and do not make for pleasant places to live. I think it's all about how well you design it. And if you went and looked at some of the densities, say at Elephant and Castle, they are being done extremely well. We've walked around that site, we've been shown how that has been master planned. I think they have done it a lot better there than in other parts of London. I won't name and shame any that I don't particularly like. So it's all to do with designing it, master planning it, and then designing it properly. I don't think we should shy away from or be afraid of tall buildings in the right place, and particularly, if you look at our overall plan, there are areas where we think tall buildings will suit perfectly well, and they won't. They will provide the sort of accommodation we need. They won't degrade. They won't degrade the environment. We're not covering the whole site with 40-storey towers. It is a very carefully planned site that will create a good environment. But I don't think we should be against well-designed tall buildings.
Would you be planning family-sized dwellings, i.e. like 3-4 bedroom units within tall buildings? And at what level, or up to what level?
There's a technical point on this, and I've forgotten what it is. Yeah. We wouldn't put we wouldn't expect to have family housing above.
So on affordable accommodation, so we have a policy which seeks to retain family accommodation in affordable family accommodation not above 10 stories. Private family accommodation, there is a choice. There will be three bed plus family accommodation in a variety of unit sizes, but there's very strict requirements in there about policy requirements in there about access to open spaces, access to public and private open spaces, and the size of the unit being able to accommodate a family. So the priority that we've said is affordable accommodation below 10 stories for families.
So you could end up having a 3-bed accommodation on 10th floor.
Well,
yes, but they would also have to, in that scenario, they would have to be able to provide a level of an appropriate level of private access to private amenity space or communal amenity space that is, in line with our kind of design standards.
Would it be on site, or are you looking at open spaces somewhere further away?
Well, I think, again, if you were to go and have a look around the Elephant and Castle development, and I'm sure Lend-Lease would be delighted to show you around that, there is a considerable amount of open space at quite high levels. You build podiums, you put sort of garden areas, gardening areas, at quite a high level. It's it's a very exciting development. I think they've done that very well. So it is all perfectly plannable and workable.
On our open space, there is for family accommodation, there is what we mean by access to open space. It's directly accessible private open space from the home. There's then a requirement around communal open spaces within the building, and publicly accessible open space within the whole area has to be 30% of the land area has to be given over to publicly accessible open space. And for example, in Old Oak North, that's 3 large open spaces, 2 of which would be a minimum size of 2 hectares.
I think that you need a lot of convincing to do and work with local communities to make sure that they are on board. Currently they are not, and that is not unusual. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now go on to the third table question in the name of Assemblymember Bailey. You have it in front of you.
Right, I do indeed. How much money would OPDC need to maximise its potential benefit to London? Well, I think the answer is probably there is no absolute answer to that at the moment, because I think a lot will depend on how we get on with the first phase. I talked early on about the need to split this up into manageable and deliverable chunks of development. Our plan for Old Oak North will require funding, we think to the tune of approximately 250 million, and if we don't get it from the Housing Infrastructure Fund, we'll have to look at other creative ways of doing that. Once we've done that, I would hope that, think as I mentioned earlier, we would show our intent, we would show that this is actually happening, it would enhance values across the site. I think we would find the private sector then stepping in to invest in the area, and then we would be able to leverage in private sector money without having to look for a huge amount of subsequent public sector funding. And I don't know how big that would be. I think a lot depends on what happens over the next sort of 4 or 5 years as we get that first part of the development going and invested in.
Morning, and thank you for your answer. I just want to take you back slightly for a little clarification for myself. When you last appeared before us in September, you talked about a delivery plan, a business plan. You hadn't settled on a name. Do you feel that that plan is solid now? Do you know where you're going?
I feel the plan is extremely solid. Whether the delivery of it is dependent on finding on the funding of it, that
we'll come
depends
to
on
that.
HIF
I'm just talking
and
about
or
the
other
plan
things.
as a concept.
Yes,
So
we have a
you
very,
have a plan,
very clear
direction
plan.
to travel in,
yes,
and that's fine.
Yes.
The delivery we'll get into later, and the big part of this plan, the kick-off part, is the 250 million that you're seeking from government.
Yes,
right. And you yourself brought up the term Plan B. Let's have a little discussion about Plan B. What does that look like?
Well, I think as we alluded to earlier, and I'll get Mick to come in here. In fact, we had a session discussing it yesterday. I mean, we would have to look at trying to access other sources of public funding. The Plan B would probably have a stronger emphasis on private sector funding. Our commercial property members of our board don't think that that's impossible. But our preference is to do it the way we want to do it with the 250 million from public sector, because we can keep a greater degree of control over the delivery. But the view is it's not undoable. We could actually probably manage. You know, we'd have to scrape, we'd have to find, as I say, alternative sources of funding. We would be leaning heavily on various pots of investment that are available to the GLA and Mr. Luntz and his team. We would be trying to access other sources of funding through Homes England. You know, there are other ways of accessing funds through borrowing, but I'm not going to pretend it would be easy. And frankly, we're not at the very moment devoting too much time to that, because I don't know whether you've ever had to prepare an outline business case for the Treasury, but that's what we're putting our energies into getting right at the moment.
And like everybody sitting around this horseshoe, I hope you're successful. But in your last time, when you sat in front of us, you talked about if Plan A didn't work, you'd have to make a direct approach to the mayor. But I didn't feel like I heard that in your answer there. Is
a
there
direct approach to the
GLA, to the mayor for some?
Well,
some
yeah, I mean, I've said, you know, that there are a number of pots of money and funds that are available within the GLA, and we would be seeking to access some of those, yes, and that, you know, that effectively is shorthand for, or longhand for approaching the mayor. Mick, do you want to just
So I think to clarify a little, so as part of our business case bid to central government for the £250 million of HIF, we're also in discussions with various parts of the GLA about how they can provide support for the programme that we're trying to deliver, which will look across, well, actually, are there land funds at the GLA that we can borrow from? Is there an affordable housing programme that the GLA can support the delivery of an increased number of affordable housing? Is there support that the GLA and the mayor could offer around the potential for a business rate scheme? So I think it's all of those elements, kind of piecing them all together. So I don't think I don't think we are at a place where we are coming to the mayor and saying we want X amount of funding, non-repayable funding. You know, that's not where we're at. We're working with the GLA about how the GLA uses its various access to funds to help us move things along in a kind of an investment way.
And in fact, a number of those funds have been created since I last sat before the Assembly. So, you know, we didn't know that there was the land purchase fund, as it's called that, you know, has been set up since then.
That's some of why I asked this question, because of course, to Londoners, to GLA, to everybody, this is the most significant site going forward.
Yes.
And it feels to me that there's, I hope I'm incorrect in saying this, but it feels that things could be made slightly easier for you, that you don't have to scramble around. You never have to get to plan B if somebody else, this building, stepped up, because there's a potential here. And if we do have a plan B and you have to go to the markets, you will lose some of the social housing you could provide. That's an observation I'm making.
I should just say, I mean, in preparing our case, for our outline business case for MHCLG and the Treasury, the work we are doing in that, were we not to get our HIF money, or it to be significantly less than we are asking for, that work will stand us in very good stead for making the case to other potential sources of funding.
That's good. Let me answer a slightly simpler question. How much more money does OPDC have now than you did 9 months ago?
Well,
could I seek a clarification? Is this revenue to operate, or is this capital money to deliver projects?
Let's say both.
Let's say both.
Both, okay. Well, I think in revenue terms, we're running on a pretty even budget to where we were last year. Same budget, in fact, which is fine. That has allowed us to do what we need to do. In capital terms, and I can never remember when the different pots we've already accessed actually come in, but we have been able to access the
Good Growth, the GLS Good Growth Fund, which is a £750. Sorry, 750.
That's not going to help much, is it?
£750,000 programme of capital works, which will be focused along Scrubs Lane and around Wilson Junction Station. And we've also been successful in securing £1.5 million of funding from the Historic England Heritage Lottery Fund and Arts Council to deliver what we've called our Great Place scheme for Park Royal, which is about uncovering and celebrating Park Royal as a place today. So there's 2 capital programmes that we're currently delivering in the area at the moment.
When you last appeared in front of us as well, I think we call it delivery plan now, we call it business plan. Your delivery plan talked about the long scheme of the programme, the possibly 30-year span of this programme. But you also made some comments about you wanted to act quickly. I think you said things like doing something relatively soon, showing people you are there, showing people you mean business, blah, 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 blah. Where are spades in the ground as we speak now? How would the local community feel about activity being performed? Is something happening?
There are things happening on site. We have a substantial housing development over in the west of the site, being done by Fairview Homes. Spades went into the ground almost the minute the Section 106 was signed. There is a substantial housing development happening on Old Oak Lane at what we call Oakland's South. That is progressing well. Last time I was there, the diggers, the shape of the building was going up. The planning permissions we have granted down Scrubs Lane are not being built out yet. I think Mick and I both feel there's probably a need for some of the other things that we're going to do to actually get started before the developers will develop out, but I shall be meeting some of those developers in the not too distant future to ask them what their plans are. The HS2 part of the site, as Mick said, that is, the site is being cleared. There is action happening on there, and some of these smaller sums of money that Mick mentioned will allow us to be able to start on some public realm improvements around Willesden in particular, also along Scrubs Lane. So we're starting to move things along. Other than the 2 housing developments I mentioned in HS2, they're not big physical developments at the moment. But if we get our HIF money, progress will start to be made very quickly after that. It will have to in order to spend it even by 2023.
Could I pick up on 2 of the key things that have been happening? We've been engaging quite comprehensively with High Speed 2 and DFT to secure significant changes to the High Speed 2 station as was approved. And that's manifested itself in 4 key outcomes for us. Firstly, Treasury have now taken a decision to invest an additional £39 million in the station to ensure that it's mechanically ventilated to allow comprehensive redevelopment of the land around that, which was not previously part of the Act which government approved. Secondly, they've agreed to put £28.5 million into the delivery of an eastern bridge, which will connect the station eastwards over the Grand Union Canal and into Old Oak North, which again was not previously part of what the Act gave them permission for. They have now agreed to look at the increase in the capacity of the station to accommodate the quantum of development that we're looking to deliver. And the 4th aspect is we've secured an agreement with UKPN and High Speed 2 which is UKPN to invest ahead of need to increase electrical provision across the area, which will ultimately mean that the first half of the development in residential units in Old Oak North will have their electrical powers met. So that's UKPN taking an investment ahead of need, which is absolutely a first in London. That's not investing ahead of need to deliver utilities. Is not something that UKPN or SSE do. So with High Speed 2, we've managed to secure that early investment. And the other things that I would say on skills is we have worked very closely with West London College to see the opening of that construction skills.
I'll come to schools, but my point is being, what is the action now? So when you talk about substantial housing projects, how many units, how big are these?
I've got the figures here. So there's just a slight clarification here. So within the OPDC boundary of that 650 hectares, there's a portion of that area which is in North Acton, whereby Ealing Council retain control of planning decisions in that area. So whilst they apply our local plan, they ultimately take the decisions by their committee. But across the piece, across that 650 hectares, there have been, since OPDC started on the 1st of April, there have been 3,476 homes approved. Okay. There have been 1,497 homes started and 1,234 student homes started since that time scale. Which
could you just run it? I'm sorry. Could you just run over those figures?
Those figures again. So, across the piece, determined and delivered within OPDC and determined and delivered within North Acton, the total figure is 3,476 units, which is comprised of 1,497 homes and 1,234 student units since the 1st of April 2015.
What proportion of those homes are affordable rent, etc., etc.?
Okay, so across the piece, within the OPDC area, what we have secured is 34% affordable by unit, 36% by hab room.
Of the housing developments we are talking about here, these two housing developments?
Across the piece, we have secured 34,000.
Hang on, I think let's just clarify. You're talking across the piece. You wanted us to talk about Oakland South and the Fairview homes.
Because I'm trying to understand the impact this will have for local people.
Yeah. So the two homes within the OPDC area that have gone to our planning committee, which total 1,412 homes. The Fairview scheme has got 35% affordable housing, and the Oakland South scheme has got 40% affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. The Mayor has been given £4.82 billion by central government. Have you had any conversation with the Mayor about accessing some of that money for your site?
Is this the Affordable Housing Programme and Land Fund?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, in short. As it stands at the moment, we are having good discussions with the Homes for Londoners team about how we might access an affordable housing programme in the future when it gets to the point of ultimately we're ready to, delivery will be happening on a large scale across Old Oak North, and we're talking through how we best do that. So there isn't an agreement in place, but those conversations are very much underway.
What sort of time scale are we talking about? Because you're talking about when you would be ready to deliver these units. Will this fund still be there?
So ultimately, this is, as we've been alluding to, unlocking Old Oak North is dependent on us. To do this quickly is ultimately dependent on us securing our housing infrastructure funding bid, and if that's the case, we'll be looking to get on site imminent, quite quick after that once we get the funding secured. So our programme for that 11,000 homes is a 15-year programme, which will start at pace, subject to a decision on the housing infrastructure fund.
So just for clarification for me, if you just secure this £250 million, let's say that happened, you're saying that this fund would be relevant to some of those 11,000 units that you could build if you could get access. Because I'm just, my major point...
The affordable housing programme?
Yes, I think that's the,
Sorry, I see. So that's the conversation that we're having now at the moment about when would those first homes be getting on site, because the programme is tied to this mayoral term, the current programme, and what we're doing is figuring out exactly when some of those initial homes would get on site subject to the HIF funding. So if they get on site before the end of the programme, then there's an opportunity to draw some of that funding down. If the home delivery moves into the next mayoral term, then we'd be in discussions about how the next round of affordable housing programme would support that.
Okay, because we seem to have all this money and none of it's been spent to be delivering homes now in London for Londoners, particularly on this huge site with great potential for
Yes,
West
but
London.
it has potential, but you can't start to realise the potential until you've put the infrastructure in. Where we can pick off early sites, we will, and we have done. But you cannot put a whole load of homes on this western wedge, this northern area that we're doing, without the infrastructure.
I accept that. I know the area very well because I used to live on both sides, in fact, all three sides of the area.
And you know how difficult it is to get in and out.
Everybody has their back to it, and the access is important.
Yes.
And things like these new businesses and homes are going to be needing broadband, etc. You know, 5G speeds. But I'm just concerned about the speed at which anything is happening, and why is the GLA, or let me put the question a different way, is the GLA giving you enough support to get this infrastructure money out there quickly? We keep talking about Plan B. The government might say, well, we've given you £4.8 billion. You're going to have to go to Plan B. Where is the GLA helping you access that money now to put infrastructure in now so we don't lose out on that £4.8 billion?
Do you want me to?
Well, I mean, go on, you do it first, I'll join in.
So what I would say is that the Oakland South scheme, which is one of those schemes that could get away, one of those developments that could get away without the need for a big infrastructure requirement, the GLA, they weren't badged Homes for London, or the timing around Homes for London or badging, I can't quite recall, but ultimately Homes for Londoners did put a sizable amount of affordable housing grant into realising an increased level of affordable housing on that site. We've talked to them about other smaller scale sites in the area, and as we know, what they're keen to do is put that affordable housing programme in with their strategic affordable housing partners. That funding that they have comes with many caveats and requirements around what they can invest that money in, which is largely about adding additional affordable housing. What we need is money that will ultimately we can spend on infrastructure delivery. So in that bid to central government, we are working hand in hand with GLA across the piece, and in particular Homes for London, about how we pull together a convincing ask from the GLA, because ultimately the GLA will submit this for us, to say that actually, you know, if government put in this, there is a programme of delivery which will include letters of comfort, hopefully around an affordable housing programme, etc., that ultimately goes in and demonstrates how the GLA, OPDC and central government are working hand in hand to deliver this programme.
I think it's an important point that Mick just raised, which is the money that is given to GLA for their affordable housing programme. I don't believe they could simply say, oh, well, we'll take 250 million of that and put it into some infrastructure. As Mick said, it is quite carefully controlled and ring-fenced in terms of how it is actually used.
But when you say you don't think, has anybody checked that for sure? Because it seems to me if you could open up that 250 million, the GLA should be providing that money if they can to get this done quickly. You have a substantial site here. You could be doing you will be, I hope, in the long term, doing very exciting things for Londoners. But the quicker we can do that,
I wouldn't disagree with the quicker we can do it. I'm confident the team is on top of what is feasible in terms of using available monies within the GLA, but we'll go round the boy again. Very happy to do that, but I'm pretty sure
we should make a direct ask for the money just to speed this up, because we are failing here to deliver homes for Londoners. That's a fact. It's a huge site.
Yeah, we are having those detailed conversations with the Homes for Londoners team. You know, we have been asking those questions behind, you know, about what can and can't the GLA put money into. That will ultimately form part of our ask and our detailed business case that goes into central government.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. I'm picking up on the potential benefits to London and want to go back to healthy streets. Last time you were here, last September, we had a conversation about the 0.2 parking spaces per residential unit, and I raised the issue that there are two different ways of measuring access to transport. There are PTALs, which are the public transport accessibility level measurements, and I also raised that Camden are combining those with ATOS, which is access to opportunities and services, which gives a more nuanced and healthy streets friendly approach. Now I noticed that you are still consulting, ends at the end of July, on a local plan that still includes the 0.2 parking spaces per residential unit. So I'm just wondering, Victoria Hills promised to look at what Camden were doing, And I just wonder, and to raise it with TfL, I wonder whether those conversations happened.
We did, and they have. And the view from the transport experts on this is building a new place like Old Oak at the moment. The most appropriate way to do this, when you don't have those local services built within that area, for now is to progress along a PTAL route. And there is absolutely nothing that will stop us introducing an approach combining PTAL and ATOS at some point in the future when we've got a better understanding about where development is actually taking place. You know, for Camden, around Camden High Street, there is a very clear, look, this is where all the services are existing, and therefore, you know, where are local people moving to? We don't quite have that at Old Oak at the moment, and what TfL said is PTAL is the right way to go, and you can introduce ATOS as an additional layer at some point in the future when you're reviewing your local plan.
Okay, and so then the other thing we also discussed was the idea of having temporary bus services to actually increase the access to public transport as you are building things, to reduce the need, because if you build in car ownership from the beginning, then you're undermining the Healthy Streets approach. So have you thought about introducing temporary you know, maybe minibus type small bus services that could actually increase local public transport options?
Yes, we have. What we have with TfL is an agreed bus strategy which looks at the next 5 years, years 5 to 10 and years 10 to 15, and ultimately there is a strategy that TfL have put together which ultimately demonstrates exactly how the bus provision can be delivered to meet the needs of the schemes that would be built within those periods of times, and that includes upgrading existing services, extending existing services, and introducing new services across the area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Boff.
Could you tell me, please, what is the size mix of the 3476 that are homes that were approved?
I don't have that information in front of me at the moment, but we can provide that.
Well, just you're probably not going to have the second piece of information then, which is for the 11,000 in Old Oak North. That was.
We have a policy requirement which seeks 25% 3-bed plus homes.
25%. So that's across the development, is that 25%? Yes. What does the local Shema say about what your requirements are for family-sized development?
Again, I don't have that information directly in front of me right at the moment.
Well, it's in your Regulation 19 document. It says,
I'm sure it is.
49%.
Pardon, what was the figure?
I think it's 49%. Hold on, 51%. 51% affordable and 64% for market housing. So why are your plans so out of step with what the local Shema actually says you should be delivering?
I think for us we are absolutely keen to deliver a mixed community in the first instance. We have vigorously tested through a viability assessment which looks at can we deliver our Shema need, and that's both across affordable housing but also family housing provision, and that tests a variety of different scenarios and makes a recommendation about when you take account of need and viability, because viability is also the additional policy requirement that has to be considered. The recommended approach is to seek to deliver 25%, and what we believe is that Pan London, what is being secured Pan London over the last 10 years is about 20% 3-bed plus. So actually what we're doing is seeking to ensure a policy base that seeks to go above and beyond what's typically delivered in London over the last 10 years. So we feel it's a pragmatic balancing need and what the market can realistically afford to deliver.
That's all very good, but in the draft London plan, it asks you to take account of those local Shmas and local factors in delivering the right kind of homes. It doesn't look like you've done that, and as a result you're only delivering half, less than half, of what your own local evidence says you should be delivering. You know, is this all viability?
As I said, it's a pragmatic mix of need versus alongside viability, whereby if you look at viability...
How do you assess the need? How do you assess the need if not through the Shema What are your other measurements?
No, so you're absolutely right. The Shema is the mechanism to identify the need. But what we've then done is to test that and to demonstrate actually from a viability perspective actually what can be delivered on site. So we've put in place a policy which goes beyond what typically is delivered in London, and that takes account small and large scale projects.
Yeah, but what's delivered across London is pathetic, and everybody, in terms of family homes, and everybody accepts that. So to better that is really not much of an achievement. The plan actually asks you to go on the basis of local evidence. You haven't done that. So what is the viability? What, you know, will you release to us these viability?
Yeah, it's on our website.
Right. And so what is the prime reason in the viability assessment for not delivering what is required, the required local need? What is it about the viability? Is it the price of land that developers have paid? Is it?
No, it's a variety of different viability issues which span across build costs associated with the amount of space that's required to do that, the values of the different values of 1, 2, and 3 bed units. There's a significant factor in here as well, which plays in around actually when you've got a sizable, dense development, which this is, which is what we're promoting. Actually, to deliver an increased number of 3-bed houses on there presents a space requirement challenge, which will ultimately mean that if you have to do more doing more 3 beds on the site presents a challenge about how you actually accommodate that quantum of development on the site. So there's a myriad of factors that play into the viability position on that.
There are certain experts about creating high-density family homes. When did you last speak to, for example, Create Streets?
We've spoken to Create Streets a number of times. We've also spoken to a variety of other experts. We have our own place review group, which is made up of 22 built environment experts, 3 of which are mayoral development advisors, and we take them through our strategy, our policy, and our development proposals. And they also, alongside the consultants that we have, which include Acon, McCraner, Lavington, etc. So there's a variety of places that we pull our kind of design expertise in from.
You mentioned that there will be residential tower blocks on the site. How many will there be? How many residential tower blocks?
That's a level of design detail that we haven't gone to yet.
I accept that. I understand that. You don't know exactly how many. That's fine. Will you undertake to actively consult all those people who can, during the planning process, all those people who will be able to see them?
What we would be through, we undertake quite extensive local consultation as part of any planning application.
I'm sure you do. This is a very simple question. Anybody who will be able to see that tower block, will you ultimately consult with them to see what their opinion is about their horizon?
When we run a public consultation exercise, it is open to every single person that can absolutely consult.
Actively consult. I mean, technically speaking, you can do this in the process that you've got at the moment, but actively consult means going and knocking on their doors or sticking a leaflet in the doors and said, will you consult? Will you give your opinion on this tower block which you're going to be able to see?
So what we're doing at the moment on our local plan is we've issued 43,000 letters to local residents. We've undertaken a detailed door knocking exercise and a series of engagements. So I think in terms of our plan, we are actively engaging with a sizable local area.
But as you've said, you don't know how many tower blocks you're going to have yet. Yeah. So what I'm looking for you is an undertaking that when you put those applications in for those tower blocks, that you actively consult everybody who will be able to see them.
What we will do is we will comply with the statutory requirements of undertaking
I'm asking you to go beyond the statutory requirements, obviously, because that isn't a statutory requirement.
And I suppose it's what we do is we send out letters to all of the local residents, local businesses. We put up the site notices. It's on our website. We actively promote that through our social engagement mechanisms.
I think it's worth looking at it from the other point of view. We would welcome comments from anybody who can see them. If we don't actually actively knock on doors, because sometimes we just do not have the resource to do that, and I think it's being pragmatic.
I live in Barking, and technically I can comment on any planning application in West London. I can do it at any time I want if I happen to know it's going on. But if my horizon is going to be affected, I expect to be consulted.
And we do that. What we don't have the resource to do is to knock on every door in West London.
That's fine. You're not going to do that.
What I suppose, just to clarify, I think what we're saying we can't do is knock on every door in West London, because we just simply don't
mail
have the
them.
resources.
I mean, I'm not going to.
We will do that through social media, through our websites, through our various kind of online platforms. We will engage proactively.
Okay. Could you provide me, Ms. Peace, could you provide me with a building that I can go and look at where the social housing tenants, a family of social housing tenants are living happily on the 10th floor?
I think we suggested 3 sites you might go and look at when we responded to the
So
chairman.
could you write to me and suggest those, and we can arrange a meeting?
I'm sorry if you didn't actually receive
I'm not
the
aware of it. It
notification,
could be a
but
problem.
yes, we would be delighted
Could be my
to.
problem.
Yes, we
Thank you very
suggested
much.
3 locations.
And what's the assessment that you've made in overcrowding in that part of London, and what is your plan to address overcrowding in that part of West London?
I think there's a technical point here at the beginning, which is as part of our Shema, what we've done is look across West London, the 3 local boroughs which with the OPDC area sits within, and that identifies a need over the next 20 years to provide 99,000 homes within those 3 boroughs over the next 20 years. So we believe that supporting or enabling the delivery of 20,000 homes within our plan period plays a significant role in helping to meet that need for 99,000, and ultimately, if you provide those homes, it helps to address the capacity issue.
Well, you're clearly not providing as many homes as your Shema says you should be with regard to family sizes. So can you, when will you be presenting us with an overcrowding plan that basically outlines what those 1 and 2 bedroom flats that you're going to be delivering, how they will resolve overcrowding in the West London area? Is that something that you will be developing?
What we have is a clear statement in our local plan, which is out at the moment, about the mix of homes that we want to deliver. And ultimately, what we can provide is a statement about how we believe that contributes, because OPDC, the 25,000 homes that OPDC delivered, it isn't on its own going to solve the housing crisis for West London. It plays an important role, we believe, but is one of a number of approaches that all of the local authorities in West London need to.
Yes, well, now the Mayor of London has decided to abandon any targets for family-sized homes. It's incumbent upon all the people who are delivering homes to now come up with their overcrowding plan. And this is me doing the Mayor's job for him. So what I'd like to see from you is a plan about how you will contribute to resolving the overcrowding issues in that part of London. Because you are a player. You know, just like a borough is a player, and I expect all those boroughs to come up with overcrowding plans in absence of any direction from the middle.
I think it's a very
hang on a minute.
idea.
Well, I think it's an interesting idea, but what I think we can do is to show how we can maximise the use of the land and the facilities that are available to us to provide as many homes as possible of the best possible mix that is consistent with viability. We can't magic things that are simply not viable out of nothing. We will be providing as many homes on OPDC, within the OPDC boundary, as we feasibly can. We can't do it on our own. We have to work with the private sector. The private sector will operate within certain constraints. We can't crack a whip and make them do certain things that do not fit with their own business plan.
So I'm quite happy that we commit to saying, actually, we'll come back and we can write to you specifically about the work that we're doing, the problems of overcrowding in West London, and how the work that we're doing can support that.
But hang on, but I think we have to remember that this isn't just our problem in West London. This is something we are working with other local authorities.
I'm not expecting you to solve all of London's problems.
Well, it sounded as if you were asking us to,
the bits that you can help with, that's where I want to see a plan.
We can talk about what we're doing within our OPDC boundary. Yes.
Absolutely fine.
That's good, thank you.
Assembly Member Gavron.
Family homes, how many are 3-bed plus? And you haven't broken that down into whether they're 3, 4, 5-bed, but how many are going to be 1 bed?
So the remaining 75% is a mix of 1 and 2. to be determined on a scheme-by-scheme basis. That is what the policy says.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Sorry, the policy is 25% family plus, or 3-bed plus, and then the remainder can be delivered as 1 or 2 bed. So there isn't a size breakdown. There isn't a size breakdown between the 1 and the 2 in the policy.
Yes, because it did sound, listening to you, that that really the driver is the number of units. In which case, you might actually tell me that you want more 1 bed than 2 bed. If the driver is units rather than meeting London's needs and mix.
What I don't have in front of me today, what I can come back to you and set out quite clearly is, for Old Oak North, for that first 11,000 homes that we're planning to deliver, we will have tested a mix of 1, 2, 3, 4 beds, which again, the evidence for that will be in the local plan. That won't be the policy, but there'll be a piece of evidence to say this is what we've tested and we believe it's deliverable. And I can happily write back to you with the figures that we've put into testing.
I think it's very important you do, because
yeah.
I think
Fine.
I don't know if I can speak for everyone around this horseshoe, but it is quite shocking to know that in this new piece of London, with 11,000 homes, only 25% are going to be 3-bed plus. That is even below the Mayor's rather low benchmark in his own Shema evidence base for the new London plan. I just want to make that statement.
Yeah,
I want to go on and ask just finally, when the Regeneration Committee has been in the presence of residents at Old Oak and Park Royal, well, mainly Old Oak, what we found is that they don't feel very engaged. They feel quite disaffected. And I think, what I think is very encouraging is that the Mayor in the London plan has a new policy which says that in opportunity areas, and particularly in areas of deprivation in opportunity areas, he will be supporting, and I think there's some resourcing, he will be supporting and resourcing local communities to be actively, this is proactive engagement, not just consultation, proactive engagement in the preparation and implementation of planning frameworks, and then goes on to say that these planning frameworks can be action plans, they could be neighbour plans, they could be all sorts of plans. And I think that means that maybe there's a conversation to be had about the role the Mayor might play in supporting and resourcing you in that work.
I think that's a very interesting idea that we could pursue. I mean, I feel that we go a huge way to consult community interests. We spend, I talk to the team regularly. I know what they do. I know the sorts of meetings they hold, the sort of connections they have. I'm always sad when I hear that people think they're disaffected and aren't being consulted adequately enough, and I'm sort of wondering what else can we actually do. But if it's a sheer matter of quantum of that community consultation, then maybe we should look and discuss with other elements of the GLA whether we could resource an enhanced level of community involvement. I would have no problem with that if we could find a means of doing it.
So good. So it's something. It's a
very good idea.
In the light of the new policy.
Yeah, absolutely, very good.
I think I should also say, I mean, a fair amount of disaffection locally has been occasioned by the fact that there is going to be a very massive construction project in the middle of where quite a lot of people live. And we've been working very closely with HS2 and with the community that are most directly affected around the station to ensure that they are getting the right flow of information. Now, it's not we're not in the best position to tell them exactly what is happening about a construction project being run by somebody else, but we make sure that somebody else, HS2, is actually delivering to the people we have within our own community sort of network and whom we know well. And we've been doing a lot of work on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you both so much for coming. Can we now please move to the motion on the agenda set out in my name, that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked?
Agreed.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No problems. Right. We now move on to petitions. Can I ask Assembly Member Desai to present the petition listed on the agenda in his name?
This budget we call on the mayor to continue to fight to ensure that the police have the resources they need to keep our community safe. Our petition attracted 125 signatures. The context of the petition is local councillor Shema Mulhern.
Thank you very much. Yep.
So if I could just say the petition. Chair, on a point of information, I had another petition from the Barbican Residents Association about tube lines. Unfortunately, that fell foul of procedural guidelines, but out of respect for the petitioners and the two local councillors, Mary Durkin and Adrian Bester, can I just put on record that they did hand this petition in and it will go straight to the mayor's office in due course.
Yes, thank you very much. Right. Will the Assembly agree to forward the petition to the Mayor in his capacity as the occupant of the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime? Thank you very much. Now we go to motions. First motion is in the name of Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you, Chair. This motion, which is about winning the backing of the Assembly and getting the Mayor to join us for the new campaign by Generation Rent, Acorn, the New Economics Foundation and the London Renters Union to remove Section 21 of the Housing Act 1988. This lets landlords evict tenants basically when they want, without doing anything more than issuing a notice. It's the no-fault eviction clause, and it's one of the major causes of the worst, most damaging uncertainties about renting. 80% of evictions are on these no-fault grounds, and 63% of private renters who were forced to move in 2016 were evicted not due to any fault of their own, but because the landlord wanted to sell or use their property for something else. Evictions from the private rented sector are the leading cause of homelessness, and for every person who avoids homelessness after a Section 21, there's still a huge hidden cost in stress, disruption to work and family life, and all the costs of moving. The total harm is huge. When I first moved to London, our new landlord served us one of these at the same time as we signed the rental agreement. It was dated a year ahead, produced at the last minute. We basically had no choice but to take it. And I've lost count of the number of friends and colleagues who've had a Section 21 eviction, often at the last possible time they would have chosen to move. It's so common. My renters survey in 2016 showed that 43%, nearly half of renters, had had to move at some point when they didn't want to. This year, one of my council candidate colleagues, Kirsten, got a Section 21 and was made to move home a few weeks before election day, counting her out of working in our ward right when it would have made the most difference, but she had no choice. I'm still a renter, and I'm now at quite an advanced age. And Kirsten isn't Generation Rent either. She has close to a couple of decades on me. And she really just wants a secure home. She was on the news last week talking about being one of these lifelong renters. And she said this: I need to be alert at all times to the possibility I might have to up sticks again in 6 months' time. I keep looking at ads to let just in case. And you can't expect people to live like that. She also said that with the government consulting on changes to tenancy lengths, possibly if you ask for them without any real controls on having the rent hiked, but she said at least that was something it was good. Someone was listening at last. And it kind of is. Politics has moved on, even since the Assembly looked at this last in 2016. Even the more right side of politics has moved on a lot in terms of considering changes to renting that were not acceptable even a few years ago. And it's the renters who are the ones who made us listen. In the 2016 London election, their campaigning was phenomenal. And all the parties put some measures for renters somewhere in their manifestos. I mean, some more than others. It wasn't usually the main mayoral candidates who turned out to the housing hustings and the renting hustings, but it was progress. And the new mayor has done some of what he promised. He set up a proper team here, for example, in City Hall to work on the private rented sector alongside boroughs. There are new things coming out in terms of information for renters. And as an Assembly, we're listening hard too. We already passed a good motion in November 2016, asking the mayor to push harder on powers and to continue to press the government for the devolution of more powers over the private rented sector in London. He listened to us, and the new draft of the housing strategy now has a new policy section which involves considering what rent stabilisation or rent control measures might involve and how they could work for London once the new London model of private rented sector tenancy reform is complete. I'm asking him how long that will be, but it is, again, progress. But we also need the Mayor lobbying to change the Housing Act in the way this motion sets out. This is a change in national legislation that would help London so much, as well as the rest of the country. It would genuinely improve the balance of power between renters and their landlords, which is so off at the moment, that even the government's new plans for allowing these slightly longer tenancies got this reaction from one landlord. They said, if this becomes law, I will sell my property, as I couldn't face the hassle of possible issues. As another of my former colleagues reacted on Twitter, these are people's homes, first and foremost, not a low-hassle investment opportunity. Yes, renters need landlords, but we need landlords who want to be and work as landlords and who will respect us. Renters like me are crying out for the change in this motion. More than 45,000 of us have so far signed the campaign's petition. We, as an Assembly, should support them and add our voice to theirs, so please vote for this motion.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you, Chair. Members and everybody indeed across the country know that today we are celebrating the 70th anniversary of the NHS. But there is another anniversary this year, a slightly less auspicious one, and that's the 30th anniversary of the Housing Act of 1988, which abolished security of tenure for private tenants and brought in the assured short-hold tenancy, which is 6 months, and because of Section 21 eviction, after that you can be evicted at 2 months' notice. Now, of course, that was brought in at a time when the private rented sector was very small. It was about 10%, even in London at that time, of the housing stock, and people that tended to live in the private rented sector didn't tend to usually have children. It tended to be single people, perhaps living there for a few years before they got a social tenancy or before they bought a house. The private rented sector of today is very, very different. More than a quarter of Londoners now rent from a private landlord. That number is increasing. It will be a third in London before long. And of course now includes many people with families, with children in local schools. We're facing the disruption of having to move at 2 months' notice, and having tenancies on a 6 month basis is simply unacceptable. We need to change the rules. I was interested to hear Assembly Member Berry's quote from the landlord that said that he would sell up if tenancies were extended. I mean, maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. I mean, I'm generally of the view that if landlords are still making money, they will probably carry on renting. But what Assembly Member Berry said was absolutely right. If you're the sort of landlord that does not respect your tenants, are you really the sort of landlord that we want to be renting out a property? These are people's homes. Now, the government is, I think, starting to catch up to some degree with the need and the desire of people living in the private rented sector for more security of tenure. First of all, of course, they took one of Labour's policies and announced they were banning tenancy fees, having spent years and years saying that this was a terrible interference in the market, and that the sky would fall in if we abolished tenancy fees. Now they've taken that policy, and there's a bill going through Parliament. And now, of course, they've announced that they want to introduce 3-year tenancies as standard. Now, that's positive, very positive in theory, but of course, a 3-year tenancy is meaningless if a landlord can still evict you at 2 months' notice. You may as well do nothing at all. So if that new policy that they have announced that they are consulting on is going to have any meaning whatsoever, it needs to include the abolition of Section 21 eviction. So I hope that the Mayor of London will respond to this consultation, will on behalf of Londoners, and will lobby very, very hard for the government to abolish no-fault eviction. Because I don't think it is acceptable for us to carry on with a situation where a quarter or more of Londoners face such insecurity. Private tenants deserve security of tenure, and I hope members will support this motion.
Sure. Assembly Member Boff.
Well, it's quite clear that on the Housing Committee we have quite a consensus on an awful lot of issues. This is not one of those issues, and you know what I'm going to say, so I'll do it quickly. Scotland absolutely is considering rent controls, has some rent controls already in place, and as a result of that, 44% of people who are renting in in Scotland have recently discovered that their rents are going to increase. That's way above the 19% for the rest of the United Kingdom. It's that threat of rent controls which is actually forcing them up, and open-ended tenancies as well. If your priority is looking after people who are there now in secure tenure currently, then that's fine, this might work. But what effect is it going to have on homelessness in London? When we're not building the houses, when we have a mayor who has to cook the books in order to say that he's done a bare minimum of starts in homes in London. What do you say to Londoners who can't find those properties at the moment, who are sofa surfing because there aren't the opportunities available to them? What you're saying to those Londoners is you're going to reduce the supply. You're going to reduce the opportunities for them to rent. Yes, there needs to be reforms. Of course there needs to be reforms. We want to see much longer tenancies, and that's a debate that we have with people like mortgage companies and estate lettings agents and all the rest of it. And a minimum light touch from the government, it will be welcome in terms of regulations on those particular areas. But just to have landlords being told that they will never be able to get rid of a tenant. What happens with regard to students, for example, where landlords are currently letting to students on a very fixed term? No longer will there be a fixed term, and landlords, of course, will increase their rents because they will have no prospect of removal. So that has to be factored. That has to be factored into their calculations. I know this is this works in that fictional world where market forces don't occur, but it doesn't work in the real world. And in the real world, this will be a disaster, not just for people who are renting at the moment, but people who want homes.
Thank you very much. Can I ask members, please, now to extend the length of the meeting? Agreed. Thank you. Assembly Member Curtin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the motion on the face of it looks like something which is very good and very virtuous. But when you dig into it and you look at what Section 21 actually is, it isn't properly explained in the motion. It says that it allows private landlords to evict tenants without reason, but that's only at the end of the contract. A 6 months short tenancy, or if after the end of the contract the landlord and the tenants agree to go on a rolling month-by-month basis to continue the contract, then they have the right to evict or to take their property back, as Assembly Member Berry says, if they want to sell their property or if they want to use it for some other reason. What this motion does actually is overturns hundreds of years of contract law. If you come to the end of the contract, there is no obligation on either party to continue that contract or make another one. Now, by all means, the other solution which has been offered up in this debate to create longer tenancies is a very good solution, and that's something we need to do, and that's something that UKIP has been advocating for many, many years. But this particular motion, ending Section 21, and then forcing landlords under certain circumstances to write and sign a new contract, even if they want to sell their house or they have another good reason for the use of their property, excuse me, please, may I continue? Thank you.
If you must.
If this motion is passed, then this will overturn those hundreds of years of contract law and overturn the understanding that we have in this country of the free market. So I would not vote for this motion, and I would encourage you to vote with me. Thank you.
Any more speakers on this? Assembly Member Berry, to sum up, please.
I won't say very much. I just haven't heard anything in opposition to this motion that shows even the tiniest bit of respect for renters who want to stay on in their homes after paying their rents and looking after the property. If you do that, you should have the right to stay in your home. 6 months security, followed by the endless threat of Section 21. That's not secure housing. Secure housing is fundamental, and so many Londoners lack that now. The amount of renters in London is equivalent to the entire population of Birmingham, living under conditions of extreme uncertainty. One landlord answering the Generation Rent post on their website says, landlords do not evict good tenants. Well, they do. They do all the time. They've evicted so many of my colleagues, so many of my friends, so many of my family. This isn't fair when it happens. You need a good reason to chuck someone out of their home. And if landlords don't want to provide long-term homes for people, then maybe they shouldn't be landlords. But we need this security of getting rid of Section 21. It would be fundamentally of benefit for renters. And if the rest of this side of the chamber doesn't respect that, then don't vote for the motion. But I trust the Assembly as a whole will pass it.
Thank you. Those in favour of the motion, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's 12 in favour, Chairman.
And those against.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against, Chairman. That's carried.
Thank you. Motion is carried. We move on to the next motion on the agenda, which is in the name of Assembly Member Sahota.
It really is a pleasure and honour to bring this motion to the Assembly to celebrate 70 years of the NHS. And I've worked in the NHS for 30 years, and it really is a pleasure to be able working with such dedicated people, and also to have the opportunity of having insight into the lives of so many people whom I have been able to serve as the doctor. In the 70 years, the NHS has become a symbol of Britain and Britishness, so much that we even celebrated it during the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. Nye Bevan was a health minister in the post-war Attlee government when he established the NHS. It was a visionary example, and it set us an example of social care in the world. Just to read out what the leaflet was, which was sent to all the people living in this country when the NHS was set up. It said, "It will provide you with all medical, dental and nursing care. Everyone, rich or poor, man, woman or child, can use it or any part of it. There's no charges except for special cases. There are no insurance qualifications, but it is not a charity. You are all paying for it, mainly as taxpayers, and it will relieve your money worries at time of illness." This was an example of social justice and a social government delivering for this nation. I could talk about the lack of funding in the NHS. I could talk about that this country has the lowest number of doctors for the population in the OECD countries. I could talk about that we have the least number of hospital beds for the population in the OECD. I could talk about the long waiting lists that are going up. I could talk about that 700,000 more people will be on the waiting list at the end of this Parliament than now. I could talk about that we have the highest vacancy rates in London for nurses, but I'm not going to. I am going to talk about the dedicated staff who work in the NHS. I'm going to talk about of their commitment to the NHS that makes it what it is. I'm going to talk about that Windrush generation that left their country and came to this island to serve the NHS. I'm going to talk about the doctors that came from India and Pakistan who served the NHS patients in the most deprived parts of this country. We owe them a great debt for the service they've given to this NHS. I'm also going to thank all the people who came from Europe and have been the backbone of social care in this country, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years. And I know that we all have our stories of the NHS, of how it served us and looked after us at the moment of need. And I personally came to value it even more when my mother, about 3 years ago, was admitted to hospital in acute abdomen, and she had a very advanced cancer. There is no anesthetic available to take away the pain of love, the pain of uncertainty, the pain of worry, the pain of helplessness, to know when someone you care for is so ill. But the NHS staff did a wonderful job for her in supporting me, my family, and supporting my mother in that illness. And that's the values that we are so grateful for and for which we recognise the NHS for. In the words of Nye Bevan, the NHS will survive as long as there are good people willing to fight for it. And I think those principles, which we are founding principles, that you don't need to worry about money when you fall sick, those principles that you will get care according to your need rather than your ability to pay, are worth fighting for. We should be fighting for the NHS. And do you know one of the most successes of the NHS is that a child born today can live for 100 years. But what will the NHS look like when that is 100 years old? That's what we should be talking about, or thinking about. What will the NHS look like, and will it actually reach its 100th birthday? And what will it mean? It will mean that we will need to invest more money in the NHS. It will mean that we need to embrace digital technology. It will make important that we make sure every part of the NHS works effectively.
Assemblyman Sahota, I really am reluctant to interrupt you here, but I'm sure that Assemblymember Shah will be able to go on in the same vein. Assemblymember Shah. You're out of time.
Thank you, Chair. I am delighted to second this motion prescribed by our doctor colleague. Let me share with you my contrasting personal experience of two very diverse health services. I've been dashing off to Mumbai practically every 3 months or so to be with my critically ill brother. There's no shortage, as you would imagine, of great doctors and medical services and support in India. But let's face it, there is no credible national health service to speak of. It's a different world in that sense. On occasions, when I'm left with my brother to deal with his daily treatment at home, the day would often start with me having a large pile of cash to pay for visiting consultants, the physiotherapist, etc. But by the evening, what happens? That pile of cash has disappeared and there's nothing left. So this is what, unfortunately, you get with private health service. You can only afford good quality health service if you're rich. Compare this with London, with UK. Out of the blue, Rekha, my wife, was struck down with a rare, life-threatening disease over a year ago. She was treated at Northwick Park Hospital, a hospital known to have its own challenges and controversy. However, she had world-class treatment, great medical care, and amazing team looking after her. The medical team who looked after her reflected London's diversity. Interesting, the doctor was an Indian consultant. The other two doctors were from Pakistani origin, a Chinese ward manager, and nurses of different origins, like Somali, a Mauritian, and African. Not only the care and treatment during hospitalization were first class, but aftercare at Central Middlesex Hospital and Northwick Park has been absolutely superb. Rekha and all our family are grateful to everyone at both hospitals for saving her life and for the care that she got. This is what our NHS is like. You don't have to be rich to afford it. It's accessible to all. It's world-class and free at the point of delivery. In London, we are particularly blessed when it comes to health service. Before NHS's inception in 1948, the London County Council had a proud history of providing hospitals and medical care in London, which was transferred subsequently to the NHS. London also has always attracted world's brightest and the best to its workforce, and this has played a significant role in shaping the diversity and cultural identity of our capital. This also, to some extent, has meant that in the capital, the NHS offers patients some of the most advanced treatment available and plays host to internationally renowned research and technological programs. London, well, again, we are blessed that we have world-leading centers of excellence, such as Great Ormond Street, the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, and Aspire, located in my constituency near Stanmore Station. I hope the mayor is listening. It is that Stanmore Station which requires staff-free access, and he'll do something about it. Hope that this sort of great institutions we have will carry on and do the excellent work that they facilitate currently. With an aging and ever-increasing population, a free at the point of use healthcare system is absolutely integral for the future development of our city and absolutely critical for a substantial proportion of deprived Londoners all across. Compare us with anywhere in the world, we have a unique health service, not perfect, but it is great. It is 70 years old today. We must secure its future forever by supporting it, improving and enhancing it. For this, we need a robust, extensive funding strategy from the government to stem the closure of GP surgeries and improve and expand the operational capacity of our hospitals. The government needs to look at also at progressive migration reform that enables London and country to continue to attract the most talented staff from Europe and across the world.
Could you bring your remark?
Indeed, I have always believed that the mayor should have a direct say on health service in London. This is why more powers to oversee the future of the NHS in capital should be devolved to the Mayor of London. Thank you very much, Chair.
Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very proud of the NHS and what it stands for: healthcare free at the point of delivery, free for everyone in this country. And I used to work in the NHS before I went into politics full time, and I would see day in, day out the dedication and hard work not only of the clinicians, but actually the support staff, the management staff, and all the other support staff that made sure that they could care for people, treat them, and striving always the best healthcare service in the world. And I was working at Guy's and St Thomas's on the 7th of July, all those years ago, where we saw what happened in London. We saw all hands on deck, people volunteering, people right across the trust coming to A&E, coming across to support for hours and hours, working together as injured people came in, not knowing initially what had happened. They absolutely today deserve our thanks and praise. And I'm really pleased in a couple of weeks' time to be hosting an event for NHS charities in London, an afternoon tea to celebrate 70 years of the NHS. And I know a number of Assembly members will be joining me at that event. So I'm delighted to support this motion, and happy birthday, NHS.
Assembly Member Whittle.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm too very happy to support this motion. We would differ on the problems facing the NHS, I'm sure. But I think that the NHS and basically social health care is the function of any civilized society, without question. I lived in America for 5 years and I had private health care because you kind of had to. And if you want in any way to understand the differences, there's nothing quite like being under private health care. Because you're aware when you go in that they've got an alternative incentive. They want to sell you things. You know, it's like going into a shop. In one time, actually, I went in for test. They said, "Oh, we've got a special on HIV test this week." A special, you know. So it's like buy one get one free or 2 for 1 or whatever. That is just absolutely wrong. And whenever you go into private medicine, there is this sense in which, of course, you know, that they're going to kind of talk up possible problems. You want to have a position where those doctors and those nurses dealing with you have got absolutely no ulterior motive to what they're doing. And so I do say happy birthday to the NHS. Contrary to what some of you might think, for what it's worth, we might have had individual people in our party who've not necessarily been wholehearted in their support of the NHS, but that is not the position of this party. Well, it's certainly not my position anyway. So I take great pleasure in supporting this motion. Thank you.
Assembly Member Boff.
We're all pretty much going to say the same thing, aren't we, really? But I just thought, I wasn't going to get up, but I was just checking on the health of a friend who happens to be the Conservative agent for Hampstead and Kilburn. And he was over in, he was abroad a few days ago, and then on the 2nd of July he felt really bad, really ill, came home. And he suffered a really poor night of sleep. And this is David Douglas, who's maybe known to some of you who've stood against him or been supported by him. And he said, I'll just read from the WhatsApp. He said he called the GP at 9 a.m. He was seen immediately before 11 a.m. Then sent to A&E and where he was diagnosed with pneumonia. That hadn't been picked up beforehand. He was then sent to the A&E and then immediate admission to the Royal Free, and can't thank all of them enough. And he's discharged. I was going to go and see him this afternoon, don't need to now. But he does finish off with, if that's a broken system, I'm a Dutchman. He's not Dutch. And so we value that work. And the bits that don't work we have to fix. But we must not throw the baby out with the bathwater and come up with some of these mad ideas that we have, that we want to change the entire system just for the sake of some of the problems that we've identified. For most people like David, they're living because of the NHS. And so, and that's a story that can be repeated 100,000 times, 1 million times around London. Don't destroy what we actually love in the pursuit of perfection, but fix the things that don't work. And that's all we have to do.
Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just briefly give my support to the motion my support to the motion on behalf of both myself and Assembly Member Berry. I'm sure every single one of us is grateful to the NHS over the last 70 years, or those years that we've been alive, for the care of ourselves, our parents, our children, friends and relations through birth, life and dying. The NHS is the most beautiful piece of collective work that has improved all our lives and means that no one should face serious illness alone or worrying about being unable to pay for the care that they need. It makes our country a truly civilised place to live, and we must all work to ensure that it can continue to play this absolutely crucial role in our lives. It's also important that we celebrate the remarkable contribution of people from other countries to making our NHS the absolute beacon of hope and good practice that it still is, despite the year-on-year squeezing of its budget. In the context of the Windrush scandal, we should particularly thank the African and Caribbean men and women who helped build the NHS and worked hard against all the odds and racism to maintain public services that we so gratefully enjoy today. And in addition, I'd also like to thank the 209,000 EU nationals that work in our health and social care sector. And lastly, with evidence that only a minority of our emergency service workers actually live in London due to the housing crisis, I was pleased to read, in response to a question submitted by my colleague, Assembly Member Berry, that the Mayor has confirmed he wants to build more homes that Londoners on low and middle incomes can afford to rent, possibly reserving a proportion of homes on NHS land for health service workers. This is particularly significant as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the NHS. It's right that we show our gratitude in the way of a motion like this, but as politicians and people who care about the NHS, we need to also work hard to bring about policies that truly support the lives of these NHS workers so they can continue to support the NHS for many years to come. I support the motion.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Sahota.
Well, I'm very grateful for the support for the motion, and also that this is given the opportunity for the Assembly to come together and give a strong message to all the people in the NHS that how supportive we are of it, and that we all join in wishing it a happy birthday, and may it long live, based upon the founding principles of Bevan. Thank you.
Thank you. Those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. And the next motion on the agenda, which originally was, no, we do in fact have Assembly Member Desai's motion.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, on the day that we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the foundation of the NHS, I'm pleased to propose this motion, which recognizes another of our vital public services. As the motion makes clear, 2017 was an incredibly demanding year for policing, and our police officers responded with dedication and bravery to 4 terrorist attacks, the fire at Grenfell Tower, and a rise in serious crime. Crime, unfortunately, is rising in London as it is across the country, and we have fewer police officers who now have more incidents to deal with. We can see the demands this is placing on our police officers as rest days are cancelled, shifts extended from 8 to 12 hours, and safeguarding officers that deal with sexual assaults and rape have caseloads above the recommended level. Long-term sick leave, particularly due to mental health and stress, is rising. And while it's important to say that this motion does not directly address the support given to the welfare of these officers, this is something which the Met also needs to focus on. And of course, if newspaper reports are to be believed, you have police officers doing second jobs as well to make ends meet. What this motion aims to do, however, is to recognize the contribution that police officers are making to keep London safe. Metropolitan police officers protect us day in, day out, and deserve to be rewarded with a pay package that reflects the indispensable nature of the job that they do. This is timely as the Home Office has received the recommendations made by the Police Remuneration Review Body and will decide on the pay rise which police officers are given and how it will be funded in the near future. Last year, police wages rose by 2% at a time when inflation was at 3%. So what this means is that they had a 1% pay cut. We hear warm words about how great our police are, but words are going to be translated into action, and this can only be done if they are resourced properly and paid properly. So I would encourage the Assembly to focus on what the police officers are doing day in, day out to keep us safe. They patrol our streets, response teams intervene in times of crisis, safeguarding teams act to prevent and pursue domestic abusers, and detectives are investigating crimes. The principle of policing by consent implies a contract between the public and our police who keep criminals off our streets. We ask police officers to take on a unique role and face up with challenges and situations that few of us will be prepared to deal with in our working lives. Part of that contract is that the public expects a well-remunerated, properly equipped police force who can see the value placed on their work. Yet police pay, as I already said, has been cut in real terms, and no extra funding has been given to the Met by the government to support rises in police pay. The message officers have received from the government instead in recent years is clear: tighten your belts and get on with the job. Police staff associations have highlighted that 8 years of austerity have resulted in real terms pay gap of 14.6% across all ranks, and a continuation of the 1% pay cap to 2020 would result in a gap between pay settlements and inflation of 23% since 2010. Just last year, we heard reports that police officers in Sussex are reliant on food banks to feed their families. And in London, particularly, we are struggling to recruit detectives and specialist roles. We have to ensure that the Met have the skills for the future. At the moment, we are not paying the police enough to guarantee we can attract the officers that are needed for today and needed for the future. A 2017 study by the Police Federation found that 7 in 10 police officers feel they are now worse off than they were 5 years ago. More than 1 in 10 said they did not have enough money to cover all the essentials. 85% did not feel fairly paid, considering the stress and strain of the job. I just want to touch very briefly on the comment made by an officer, a detective from the Metropolitan Police, who said, and I quote, "The job which I joined has changed immeasurably. The role has been devalued. Detectives are overworked, accountability has increased year on year. There has been a shift in having to be all things to all people instead of concentrating on catching criminals. There's no recognition for police work, and promotion boards have lost their way. This is why we are calling on the Mayor to lobby the government to fully fund the cost of the September 2017 pay rise, and the pay rise for 2018-19 is also funded by the government. So far, the government has shirked its responsibility and walked away from funding police pay increase in London. For every deserved 1% police officers receive, the Met have to find £23 million, the equivalent to more than 400 officers per year. Police officers that keep London safe deserve to be properly paid for their efforts. It is shameful the central government are unwilling to provide any funding for police pay increases. I call upon the Assembly to support this motion.
Thank you very much. Seconder, Assembly Member Dismore.
Formally reserve my right to speak.
Okay. An amendment has been tabled, which I think has been circulated. The amendment you will see in bold right at the end of the amended motion, and the mover is Assembly Member Bacon.
I come from a relatively large family, and the vast majority of them are either state school teachers or Metropolitan Police officers. I don't think I need to declare an interest in that on that basis. But the amendment that we are moving today is not in any way intended to be unhelpful or a wrecking amendment. We haven't changed a single word of the motion as drafted by Assembly Member Desai, except to add on 2 paragraphs at the end. First and foremost, we should say, we agree entirely that a pay rise offered by the government should be funded by the government. Ultimately, it's all taxpayers' money, but as we know, every single police service in Britain has had to absorb spending reductions or funding reductions, and in the case of the Metropolitan Police, it costs on average £55,000 per police officer. Last year, the pay bill for the Metropolitan Police was £1.788 billion. So if you look at 1% of that, just as a rough calculation, that's nearly £18 million, which would equate to 325 police officers. I'm happy to accept the figure that Assembly Member Desai just said, because there are variations within that according to rank. So a 2% pay increase, of course, would equate to roughly 650 police officers. Now, the purpose of our amendment is to point out that the Mayor himself is not powerless. If you were to listen to the arguments that he has made for the 2 years since assuming office here, you would assume that he is, but the truth is very far from that. He can make changes without being forced to raise taxes by a single penny. He himself commented in front of the Budget and Performance Committee during the last budget round that he didn't think that the Metropolitan Police was operating at maximum efficiency. And this was later reinforced by an HMI CFRS report, which stated that the Met had only a limited understanding of the level of quality and service it can provide and was failing to spend taxpayers' money as efficiently as it might. And it concluded that the Met required improvement. Now, in addition to this, MOPAC's budget has increased by 22% since the Mayor took office. Now, it's worth looking at what the purpose of MOPAC is. It hasn't changed since the previous administration. The job of MOPAC is to provide a strategic lead for the Metropolitan Police and to hold the Metropolitan Police to account. It's no more complex than before, certainly not complex enough to justify a 22% funding increase, which of course comes from the pot of money available to fund the Metropolitan Police. MOPAC's budget is just under 2% of the Met's entire £3.2 billion budget, and as a point of comparison, other police forces up and down the country spend on average 0.85% of their budget on the police and crime commissioners, which is the equivalent to MOPAC. Another point of context, the London Assembly's budget is £7.5 million, and our job is to scrutinise the entirety of the GLA family. That's a £16 billion budget. But MOPAC has a budget, it scrutinises a budget 1/5 the size of the GLA family group, and yet has a budget that is more than 8 times larger than the London Assembly's budget. What is this money actually going on? The 22% increase in MOPAC would fund an additional 191 police officers. The Mayor's sole tactic in the last 2 years has been to point fingers and shift blame. Well, we don't think that that is good enough. We think that actually, in negotiating with government, his approach so far has been failing. If he negotiates with government, demonstrates that he's prepared to put his house in order, demonstrates that he's prepared to prioritise police officers over bureaucrats, then he would strengthen his hand considerably. And the cumulative impact of this amended motion, if it were passed and if it were honoured by government, would be an additional 500 police officers on the streets of London without raising tax by a single penny. That's the purpose that we've put this amendment, and we hope the Assembly will support it.
Assembly Member Bailey.
Second, Bailey speak.
Okay. Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you very much, Chair. We on this side Look, welcome a debate on the issues that Assembly Member Bacon has raised in terms of MOPAC, but members need to be aware that in terms of new ways of working and what MOPAC does, its net budget really hasn't changed. Its gross budget has changed, and most of that is going on commissioning services. So the violence against women and girls, crime diversion projects on young people, the Prevent programme. But nevertheless, what we say on this side is that is best left for a future discussion around in terms of the budget and about what, as I think Assembly Member Bacon said, what does MOPAC do or doesn't do. So I think on this occasion we will not be accepting the amendment, particularly around the MOPAC one, but would welcome a future discussion around those issues and about what MOPAC does, and rightly so, because this is the Assembly body that should be looking at MOPAC as much as we look at the MPS. Now, on the second part of this motion, of course, issues around efficiency or waste, whatever you want to call it, tomato, and all the rest of it, is that you can get efficiencies out of an organisation of the Metropolitan Police, but we urged yesterday in the Police and Crime Committee a very robust response back, not to to the inspectorate, but also other independent people that had actually endorsed the Met's approach in tackling waste. So whilst we accept there may well be further efficiencies and there are unidentified sums that have got to be found, we're not accepting that on this proposal to fund in terms that anywhere near what a future wage bill would be. So therefore we take it in the spirit that's been proposed by the Conservative group of wanting to encourage debate and thinking around these areas, but today we don't accept the amendment for this, this motion, and we prefer to stick to the core motion that's before us. But we welcome the debate in the future.
Assembly Member Dismore, do you want to speak now? Okay. Assembly Member Bailey. Well, that's it, really. I put the amended... I beg your pardon. Assembly Member Desai, would you like to sum up?
No, the motion, my colleague...
Well, he doesn't want... Our second member doesn't speak. Your seconder doesn't want to speak.
So you could take the amendment first.
The only person who's spoken on the amendment is Len. Right, so you're responding to the whole shooting. You know what's going to happen though, don't we? We don't have to say. Okay.
No, I'll just be very brief, Chair. I think Assembly Member Duval has put the case for rejecting the amendment. This motion should be above party politics. It's about recognising the work that the police service do and about rewarding them properly.
Thank you. Politics. The fascism is about politics.
Put the amendment first. Those in favour of the amendment, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favour of the amendment.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12 against.
Okay, the amendment falls. We now vote on the original motion. Those in favour of the original motion, please show. Those in... Well, that's pretty unanimous. Yep, unanimous. Thank you very much. The motion in the name of Assembly Member Dismore has been withdrawn.
Hooray.
So we now have the final motion, which is in the name of Assembly Member Russell.
Oxford Street. It's our main high street, London's flagship shopping street, and it's in a very sorry state. It's bus traffic dominated, has a terrible record on crashes and collisions, shops are closing, and this December Crossrail will open with tens of thousands of people accessing Oxford Street in football match crowd conditions every day. So doing nothing is just not an option. Oxford Street has some of the most dangerous junctions in London, and people are sadly being killed and very seriously injured with alarming regularity. Shops are struggling. We've just lost the House of Fraser, and John Lewis are putting their upgrade plans on ice until it's clear that Oxford Street will be improved. Businesses want this project. At public consultation, 64% of the responses supported the plans in some form. There's been bad air on all this year on Oxford Street. We've breached EU nitrogen dioxide limits on 127 days so far. We're only halfway through the year, so that is pretty much every day this year. And it's not just a manifesto commitment of this mayor. This is something that Londoners have been crying out for years. No mayoral candidate in 2016 could get away without committing to sort out Oxford Street. London needs this. We should be ashamed to leave our flagship high street in this state. And it's also not okay that one London borough can scupper the plans. The state of Oxford Street affects people living, working, and visiting Oxford Street. We need a solution that reduces traffic overall in the area, provides clean air, effective public transport, and delivers safe walking and cycling conditions. The Mayor does have powers under the GLA Act to pursue this scheme and make it happen. We all know doing nothing is not an option. The Mayor has said that the status quo isn't going to cut it. So this is a really simple motion. It expresses our frustration that this vital project needs all of us pulling together to make this much needed change to our city. And by passing this motion, we're just asking the Mayor to use some of the powers he has access to under the GLA Act as far as he can to keep pressing on with this necessary transformation of Oxford Street. And I hope members will support the motion.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're quite blessed in London in having a number of public squares, open spaces that have seen so much improvement and benefit and funding from TfL and local councils to actually make them places where you want to walk. So I always think of Windrush Square in Brixton. Many years ago, that square was filled with drug dealers, open prostitution and rubbish. But transforming squares like that, you can see more people enjoying the public space. But there's still one piece of the missing jigsaw in terms of number of those squares that have been transformed. Air traffic and air pollution. Walking up and down, you still breathe in those toxic fumes. Fact, Oxford Street is one of our busiest shopping districts. Fact, Oxford Street is one of the most polluting roads in London. Fact, Oxford Street is also one of the most dangerous roads because people still die there and a number of people are injured on an annual basis. So pedestrianising Oxford Street is a no-brainer. It's something that would actually work and something that all of us would benefit from. The residents that live there, the thousands, millions of tourists that visit there, and the many people who work there. I've worked at two ends of Oxford Street. Firstly at the Marks and Spencer's in Marble Arch, and then at the O2 store, slap bang in the middle. And I can tell you, getting from one end to the other sometimes is a challenge. And if you walk along Oxford Street right now, I guarantee you will see a number of people walking in the road because the roads is just so congested. Even with the new central crossing where the bus is and where you can cross diagonally, it's still a minefield sometimes walking along Oxford Street. So doing nothing won't help. By the time Crossrail is open, we're going to see over 70,000 people coming in and out of just Bond Street Station alone. Again, trying to come out of Bond Street Station now sometimes is a challenge. And then you add shopping bags to that, or in my case, you add a buggy and a baby. It is a challenge. So the fact that we do need to see less buses and taxis along that road really has to work. The Mayor and TfL have been working with Minister Council and a number of businesses, spending time, effort, money to actually look at these plans. And the Mayor and TfL need to continue to address the concerns from local residents. It's only right that they are taken into consideration before anything is agreed. But for this to work, all parties need to come to the table, and that includes Westminster Council. We have to put the party politics aside to look at the wider benefits for all the residents, Westminster Council's residents, and the many visitors that continue to come there. The reality is that doing nothing won't work, but yet by coming back to the table, by looking at some of the powers that the Mayor has under the GLA Act, but again, working with Westminster Council to say, let's look at making sure pedestrianisation Oxford Street is not something that is still being talked about in years to come, but actually we look at something to start that big journey and making sure it works now. Thank you.
Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Thank you. I very much welcome this motion. The arguments for pedestrianising Oxford Street are clear. It will reduce pollution. It will reduce deaths and serious injuries on a road that sees a very high number of deaths and casualties. And it will make the area dramatically more attractive to visit, to shop and to eat, a true destination. And these factors are growing in significance. You know, the level of crowded pavements, as we've already heard, will get dramatically worse when Crossrail opens. And at the same time, we can't overlook, as the proposers already outlined, you know, major retailers are taking the decision to close their shops there or look at stopping any future investment. You know, developments are occurring in retail. We've now got 2 Westfield shopping centres in London, providing for those who want to shop all day a much more pleasant environment and visitor experience. And we've got further plans for one down in Croydon. If we want people to visit Oxford Street in large numbers, if we want to have successful retailers, we want it to be London's premier high street, if we want to ensure it's part of a vital, vibrant West End, and if we want all of these things to happen, it's got to become a more attractive environment than it is now. And it could be a really safe place to walk. It could be a place where we have street stalls, entertainment, shops, especially in summer evenings and weekends and in the holiday periods. And it could become a destination like Covent Garden is for tourists and visitors. But that will not happen unless we have full pedestrianisation. And yes, we know there are challenges. Rerouting the buses, looking at where taxi ranks are, looking at where the cycle routes are. But these challenges can be overcome and they must be overcome. Because if they're not, what I can guarantee is we'll see a future decline of Oxford Street. This street is of strategic importance. Quite frankly, it should always have been a road managed by TfL rather than the borough. It is a strategic road for London. This is a flagship scheme for the Mayor, but it's also a flagship scheme for London. We need the Mayor to be bold and deliver this vision, and for the local borough to come to the table and work with him to achieve this for the whole of London.
Assembly Member Whittle.
Yes, I'm mindful of the time, actually, Mr. Chairman. It is 1:15. I just have to me, this looks like a lost cause. It's not going to happen. It's been dropped. So I don't quite know why we're going to be discussing this and taking it forward in the context of so many shocking problems that we should be discussing in London. Quite often our role in the Assembly is called into question. What do we do and everything? Why should we start then discussing something that's effectively not going to happen, and indeed always had the feeling about it that it wasn't really going to happen anyway? During the mayoral campaign, actually, I did actually talk against it because I don't like pedestrianisation, simply because I think it mummifies places. When you talk about Covent Garden and how wonderful that would be for Oxford Street, to me it feels like, you know, it just mummifies them somehow, and I do quite like the sense of verve and all the rest of it that traffic brings. I don't think that Assemblymember Bailey is that interested in the fate of House of Fraser, actually. I just think she doesn't like cars and what have you, and motorisation of any sort. That's more what it's about. And the reason that the high streets generally are failing is not about pedestrianisation. But the main point really is this, is that, you know, let's talk about other things, shall we, and just, like, you know, draw a line under this one. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much. Assemblymember Bacon.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. There is, I think, general agreement of the desirability to pedestrianise Oxford Street. It's something that's been discussed in this place for many years. Westminster City Council are also keen to do it, but they're not keen to do it at any cost to their residents, and that's the key point here. Westminster Council had some grave concerns about Transport for London's approach. They went to the polls in the recent local elections with an 8-point plan outlining their concerns and what they were pledging to their residents they would and wouldn't accept in terms of the approach and the way forward. They were re-elected. Their mandate is secure on this. They can't simply abandon their residents and allow TfL to do whatever they like. I listened to Assemblymember Pigeon saying that it should be a TfL red route. It should always have been under TfL's control. That's an interesting argument to make, but the fact of the matter is that it is not. The way that this motion is written suggests that the Mayor should just simply push on anyway and impose it against the wishes and over the head of Westminster City Council and the residents of Westminster. That is completely the wrong approach, Mr. Chairman, and for that reason we will not be supporting this. In doing so, it's not saying we don't want to see Oxford Street pedestrianised in the future. Far from it. All the concerns that people have outlined are entirely correct and accurate. I used to work not far from Oxford Street myself. I know that Assemblymember Eshalomi's descriptions of people having to walk in the street and the pavements being massively congested are entirely accurate. The fact that Crossrail is going to be coming there will be adding significantly to that. Clearly a solution does need to be found. But simply imposing it from Transport for London onto a borough, we've seen that happen so many times in the past and it always ends badly. It's the wrong approach and this motion should be rejected.
Assemblymember Dismore.
I have some sympathy with what Assemblymember Bacon has said, but I must correct one thing. West End Ward elected for the first time a Labour councillor, as well as two of the Conservatives. They lost one of the seats in West End Ward, which covers Oxford Street. I do want to see pedestrianisation, but like Assemblymember Bacon, I think we do have to consider the residents as well. The streets that are parallel to Oxford Street should not become another bus park like Oxford Street itself is. And that's where a lot of people live. It's very easy to walk along those streets and just look at the shop fronts without looking up at the flats, which are above all those shops, and also at right angles to those roads as well. And it would be, to my mind, a false move to effectively transfer the pollution from Oxford Street, which is not actually a residential road, into the residential roads on either side. So I think it's, whilst it is important that we do get on with this, also there has to come up with a plan which involves making sure the residents' interests are protected, which does mean making sure there's less traffic, less buses, and all the rest of it. And I would hope that the Mayor will be able to work with Westminster, and indeed the three ward councillors. It is now a split ward, so there is a degree of political consensus over this issue, to come up with a conclusion. I hope the Mayor doesn't have to use a big stick like this to try and get his way. That is always in the background and available to them, and I hope that Westminster Council will approach this, as I saw on the news yesterday, in a constructive way. I think, I can't remember the name of the individual councillor who was there, but he said he saw the Mayor's move as a constructive one. The Mayor equally is quite right to say that we can't go on forever and ever and we have to come up with some sensible plans. So I will support the motion, but I'm very pleased to say that the motion does specifically say that concerns of residents have to be addressed.
Assemblymember Bailey.
I think much has been said about this and all the points have been covered ably by my colleagues around the table, but I think it's worth re-emphasising 2 points in particular. One, if the Mayor goes ahead in this fashion, it sends a really bad signal to one of our very important councils. Many a thing will need to happen in Westminster, and a partnership between the Mayor and Westminster is definitely the way to go. Imposing this, which even if you look at the results in those wards, it'd be interesting to see how the Labour council in those wards, how he campaigned, what he asked for. Imposing something of this nature, and that is what's being asked here, to impose something on the council, would be a retrograde step. Also as well, if you look at the physicality of the location, the streets either side where all the bus traffic will be sent up are smaller streets, more idling, slower journeys, and I actually think you could be looking at a raise in the amount of deaths just because of the actual physical layout of those streets. So the idea that the Mayor should just press ahead and place the pollution elsewhere, because it wouldn't solve the pollution problem, it would put it elsewhere, to me is an anathema and something needs to be done. And the last thing is this: if the residents don't want this, we should at least listen. We, in this case being the Mayor, we should at least listen. These are people who are well aware of the noise of Oxford Street, the danger of Oxford Street, and to ask them, in the interest of pedestrianisation, which I personally think is a good idea, but not at any cost, to take on the noise and the danger is wrong. If the reason for pedestrianisation of Oxford Street is because the noise and the danger is too high, then why should we inflict it on the residents nearby is a mystery to me. So I will not be supporting this motion, because the Mayor, in my opinion, has not done enough to make this happen. We all agree that it's desirable, especially with Crossrail coming, but the Mayor needs to do more work and not just go for these simple solutions that will be simple for him but for nobody else. Thank you.
Assemblymember Russell to sum up.
Thank you, and thank you for all the comments and contributions to the discussion. I just want to read out something to members. The Mayor and GLA are legally required by the General Transport Duty contained in Section 143 of the Greater London Act 1999 to meet the needs not just of those living, but also those working and visiting London. And I think that is why it is really important that we pass this motion today. the Mayor has access to powers that can enable him to push ahead with a project to make this whole area of London better, to reduce the traffic, to clean up the air, and to make sure that Oxford Street is truly a flagship high street for London and actually for the whole of the UK. And at the moment, it absolutely isn't that. I'm very grateful that Assemblymember Dismore is going to support the motion, and I absolutely note his point that we do need to take on board the interests of residents, but we also have to think about a widespread. We don't have to say that just by dealing with Oxford Street, that does not mean that we are pushing pollution to other places. We need to have a solution that reduces traffic, that makes sure that conditions for walking and cycling are safe and convenient and comfortable. And we just need the Mayor to use these legal powers that he already has and fulfil his manifesto pledge.
Those in favour of the motion, please show.
11, Chairman.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Chairman.
Okay. The motion is carried. Date of the next meeting. The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly is Mayor's Question Time, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Thursday the 19th of July 2018 here in the Chamber. We now have an item of urgent business which I must read out to you very carefully. In accordance with section 100B(4) of the Local Government Act, I have agreed to accept an item of urgent business on the grounds that the report was not available at the time the agenda was issued, and in order to ensure that it is dealt with in a timely way. Members will see that there is a document set out at item 8B, which has been provided to members only and has been reserved from publication for the reasons set out on the supplementary agenda. Should members wish to discuss the content of that document, we will need to resolve to exclude the press and public from the meeting. If members do not wish the Assembly to discuss the content of the document, can I ask that pursuant to Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, the information set out as agenda item 8B should be excluded from publication on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined by paragraph 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, and it is considered that in all circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information, and also to note the information set out. So I must ask you now, do you wish to discuss the matter? No, thank you very much. And therefore, can I now ask the Assembly to consider the report of the monitoring officer in relation to a complaint received about a statutory officer of the authority and recommend that no further action be taken?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much.
GLA, Chamber, Sound. 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 GLA, Chamber, Sound.